Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series. What if Deku was trained by Lelouch? Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
When you discover something that should have been clear from the start, do you ever get that, oh, feeling? For instance, holding a knife stable while cutting by placing your pointer finger on its side. Yes, when I was 4 years old, I experienced that same feeling. Although I no longer experience that emotion, I am continually reminded of the lesson I learned since I am reminded of it every day. That lesson has been ingrained in my mind ever since the day I was declared quirkless, but for some reason, I'm still here. Sometimes I feel thankful that I have my mother at least, but other times I think she is the only reason I haven't followed Kachan's counsel. In front of Mom, my dad appears as though he cares, yet he has occasionally casually forgotten my name and dismissed it as a joke. Instead of laughing it off, I'm starting to feel like Gary Oak here. I can see the sadness in my mother's eyes even though she constantly tells me that I'm doing well and that she is proud of me. She feels like she made a mistake, even though she loves me. I'm not arguing that she didn't make a mistake a decade ago, but I'm getting off topic. Aside from the white and crimson that came from the bloody bandages from my mother's effort at first aid, my room was dreary and uninteresting. The damage I sustained was harmful because I was quite weak for my age. I started working out halfway through my final year of middle school in an attempt to divert my attention from my life, and it occasionally helped, but not always. I called it father-daughter quirk training because my sister and dad would do a lot of the same things I did, including going to the gym and running. When Izumi declared her desire to become a hero, my father seized the opportunity to assist her in her training since he shares my passion for heroes, which began when I was 4 years old. Even while I may not be as fond of heroes as I once was, I still aspire to be one in order to demonstrate to society what a hero should be. Someone who saves others without hesitation rather than thrusting their asses in a camera and only thinking about the spotlight. In one way or another, I wish to save people all across the world. Izuku Midoriya Yagi is my name, and this is the tale of how I rose to become the greatest hero in the world. Izuku's perspective. Just pray to be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. That was Bakugo's final statement to me on the final day of middle school. Izumi remained silent for the moment, staring at Kachan with an expression that defies description. I would suppose that it was a combination of exhilaration, terror, and somehow arousal. I'm just speculating, but she didn't appear to be totally offended by what he said at the time. After some serious consideration, I may decide to switch to general studies as it has been a few months since then and I have at most 10 months left before the UA entrance examinations. Even while I might pass the entrance exam and the basic physical exams thanks to my physique, I might fail at proper fighting or heroics and end up killing someone. As I made my way home from a demanding training session at the nearest gym to the family home, I kept thinking about the subject. I heard a voice as I was walking. It wasn't a loud voice, but it was close. I had the impression that it was a figment of my mind or in my head. A voice I recognized yet didn't recognize. I walked on after shaking my head. My mother always made my day better by walking up to me with a warm grin on her face. Izumi waved and gave me her classic phony smile when I got home, and my father didn't even look up from his newspaper. My mother asked courteously, her smile remaining constant, "How was your trip?" I say with a fair amount of enthusiasm, "Pretty solid. I got some great advice from someone who was working out in the same place as me, and I made some excellent progress." My father still hasn't even listened to me, so I turn to face him. My mom comes over and gives me a hug after apparently noticing that I'm looking down. I gave her a hug in return, and she whispered affectionately, "I hope you know that I'm so proud of you, honey." Now that I think about it, I can't afford to give up now. I will become a hero. Regardless. In addition to saving lives, I'll make sure my mother's grin never fades. I will always be a hero, regardless of what Izumi, Kachan, or Dad have said or haven't said. In one way or another. Regardless of the price. Izuku's perspective. It had been days since I had last spoken to my mother. The only sounds coming from the clumsy household were the simple walks and short talk. I had a gut sensation that something was wrong as I laid in bed. It had been a long time since I had felt so at peace. Izumi, in particular, never left me alone throughout the summer, although even she became quite silent. She would simply carry her meals to her room during supper. I believe that my mind is malfunctioning as a result of all this independence. Do you recall the voice I heard? Well, it's still there. I can't stop hearing them talk in completely nonsensical sentences. It was a woman's voice, lifeless and frigid. I choose to take a stroll to the nearby convenience shop in order to divert my attention from my problems. The proprietor is a very kind man who occasionally gives me discounts. He admitted to me that he was also eccentric, and we shared our own tales with one another, the owner, less frequently. I bid my mother farewell and, as usual, nod to my submissive father behind his newspaper before leaving. The only noteworthy aspects of the very uninteresting walk were the slight coolness in the air and the slate clouds that hung above my Musutafu housing complex and hometown. Alright, I may have been unclear about one more small thing, but I will still bring it up. As Michael Jackson once said, I had the impression that someone was observing me. I occasionally looked back, but I didn't notice anything unusual or a detail that may provide a risk or problem. Letting my head dangle, I quickly began to think more deeply about the specifics of how I would continue my education or whether or not I should attend UA. I was aware of my destination, but to what course? Would the hero course even be feasible for someone like me? And which course would be the most appropriate for me and expand my job options? I suddenly realized that I had almost reached my objective, so I forced myself to stop thinking about it. After almost slipping on my own 2 feet and spinning on my heel, I regained what little self-control I had left and waltzed into the convenience store. As soon as I enter the building, I can sense its perfectly cozy yet distinctive vibe. There were a number of trinkets, including framed artworks, cutouts from the back of pizza boxes that were made into miniature sculptures, and cereal box prizes from more than 10 years ago. A cozy-looking chair with a yellow plush toy that was popular in the past and affectionately called Cheese-kun caught my attention as well. Although I never saw the owner occupy that seat, I was never given authorization to do so either. I talked to him while standing normally, respecting his boundaries. After some searching, I eventually located the store's owner sitting at the checkout desk with his head down. As I approached, I could see that he had dozed off as usual. He gently woke up and raised his head to face me after I gave him a little shoulder shake. With his eyes scarcely open and obviously still half sleeping, he asked me, "MPH. Izuku? What are you doing here?" I stared to the floor and laughed sheepishly, saying, "I was hoping to talk. And also, I ran out of plain chips." He sighs and slowly gets up from his seat at the checkout, a smirk that is confined to his eyes spreading across his face. He asks in jest, "Well, what is it that which you wish to discuss?" as he approaches one of his seats and motions for me to talk. I walked near the man after dropping a few dollars on the counter and started thinking about what had been happening. I paced back and forth in front of him for about 10 minutes, remembering the advice I had received and the nauseating sensation in the back of my mind. Naturally, I omitted the voiceover since I didn't want to lose the support of one of my few friends. He closed his eyes and sat silently, as usual, processing the information. I've discovered that despite his modest demeanor, he is quite intelligent. Women occasionally try to flirt when they enter the store, but they always manage to get out. I can say with pride that I have participated in many of these escapades. I rambled on for a while before pausing to collect my breath, blushing slightly as I realized I had just launched into another one of my mumble rants. As I turned to apologize, I noticed that he seemed to be taking in what I had said. He told me in a rather stern tone of voice, his eyes closed the entire time, either to rest them or to make a point. "Well, for starters, congratulations for graduating from that hellhole. That was an awful environment for a child like you to be learning in, so I am grateful that you survived. But if you want my advice, that sickening feeling, the feeling of being watched, followed. Even if it seems unlikely, I urge you to never ignore it. Even if it may seem irrational, you can never know when something awful may happen." His remarks really resonated with me because I was already experiencing worsening feelings from the stroll and from my own house. Kachan and Izumi are quiet. That isn't feasible. Not a single offensive remark. No, that would be like no flour on a pancake. They were the reason my life turned out the way it did, so what in the name of God were they doing? I gave the man a short thank you before hurriedly leaving the store because I was so anxious to see my mother. After racing non-stop for a few minutes, I finally saw the sign indicating that my street was approaching. However, just as I was about to cross it, a burning sensation encompassed my arm and briefly engulfed me. At the same time, the all-too-familiar sound that I had been anticipating and dreading for weeks echoed in my ears. A loud clap. I knew of just one individual who could make such a loud bang. As another pair of feet approaches, I hear the walking Hiroshima talk mockingly. "Sorry for the wait, Deku. I just expected you to take my advice already. But I guess we need to teach you one more lesson. A lesson in trickery." Those were Azumi's footsteps, and I knew it all too well. Even though I could almost hear the smile in her gait, her quiet didn't help my mood. At least I will know that my intuition was correct if I pass away today. My arm was scorching, and the pain only got worse over the following 3 minutes. They smashed my forehead against the concrete with a little more vigor than usual and stepped on my new cuts whenever I acquired them. It hurt like hell, to be honest, but eventually I stopped crying out in agony as much. But this time? Like the old days. Did you notice that I only mentioned 3 minutes? I kind of lied. It felt like only 3, but it likely lasted much longer. Has the adage, time passes by when you're having fun, ever crossed your mind? It's like that, but it's not, either. The adage, I suppose, is intended to convey that time seems to fly by more quickly when one is distracted. In other words, it was essentially the same old thing. Azumi's telekinesis threw me around, Kachan's blasts blasted me all around, I was occasionally physically attacked, and I was constantly insulted with everything from blatantly nasty and reprehensible to just plain bad wordplay. Had I been able to run? No, why am I aware of this? Experience. I was forced to accept it. I suppose that I would die young if I didn't. The ache would only become worse if I didn't. I was forced to accept it. I was unable to stand and was huddled in the fetal position. I could hear the explosions echoing in my ears over and over. Even though I had become worse, I would still describe this as a torture session and a half. The explosions ceased and the buzzing from my sensitive eardrums disappeared just as my eyelids closed and my consciousness waned. With some difficulty, I opened my eyes, adjusting to the bright gray skies and the shimmering sun behind the smokescreen of condensed, thick water. I noticed the store clerk standing in front of Kachan with a stern expression on his face as I looked up. A plastic bag containing plain chips caught my attention behind him. Yes, it was my primary motivation for visiting the convenience store in the first place. They were yelling back at him as he shouted. For the first few phrases, the ringing in my ears made it impossible for me to understand what they were saying. But eventually, I started to hear some sounds. However, one statement was more noticeable than the others. His name stood out like a swordfish in a pod of dolphins, though I'm not sure if it was because I had never heard it or how he spoke it. Wait, I think I now know why I was so taken aback. They both listened to him, which is why. Lelouch v. Britannia commands you, both of you, disperse at once. Just a few minutes before. Even as a child, I swear to God, I didn't have this many problems. Even if my dad was a racist and homicidal madman, at least I had people who stood by me. I'm attracted to the youngster every time he passes by my store. His absence of a quirk makes you want to be his friend even though no one else has given that emotion a chance. The only quirks we had before I was afflicted with this code were nightmare frames, or superpowers, from comic books. Decades later, nightmares have vanished and superheroes have entered the real world. All of my hard work was in vain when these anomalies appeared, even after the Zero Requiem had been in operation for a good few years. However, other from the fact that he doesn't appear to want to kill, this youngster shares my values. I want to chat to him every time he comes, even if he is a nice and shy boy. I might respect the child more because he's one of my few regulars, but it doesn't matter right now. CC is still in the rear, and he genuinely finds it amusing to hear the many antics he engages in when given the opportunity. This time, CC shows some feeling for someone. I always have a bag at the cash register in case the local green bean shows up out of the blue because the youngster has an odd preference for plain chips. That youngster always appears so upbeat, but I fear about him. Even though everyone uses him like a battering hammer, I don't understand how he manages to maintain such a cheerful smile. He gave me money, but he forgot to acquire his bag of plain chips because he was in such a hurry to get home, I realized in the middle of my inner monologue. Despite the fact that I detest jogging, I will not defraud my top client. The door of my store chimed automatically as I left, so I hastily picked up the bag and hurried out. I didn't see him right away, so I started to quicken my pace toward the direction he was going. After a while, I paused to gather my breath, wondering how children like him and Suzaku could have such enormous endurance. However, I get back up and run for 2 more minutes before stopping. I heard a loud noise when I was running. No, several loud sounds. Screams of pain, laughter, explosions. And I was aware of the source of those shouts. I started to run. With only one thing on my mind now, the ache I felt from my lack of stamina swiftly left my head. My top customer was being saved by that thing. When I finally located the source of the screams, I discovered a repulsive scene. A boy with spiky ash blonde hair and a girl who resembled Izuku quite a little. While the boy hurled active bombs at the helpless youngster, the girl used a quirk that seemed to like telekinesis to hold the boy down. I felt sick to my stomach as their laughing echoed down the alley. Please don't criticize me. I am aware that I am a hypocrite. Having had enough of injustice, I gritted my teeth and went to where the attack was still going on. I begin, bringing the exclamations to a halt as they both turned to face me in perplexed silence. To think that people like you two Neanderthals get to flaunt your pride and heroic prowess over a weak individual who simply wishes to help people. How utterly pathetic. With a sarcastic tone and a sly smile, the ash blonde, who I could only presume was this Kachan, or Katsuki Bakugo that Izuku has occasionally referenced, asked me, "Got a problem, dipshit?" I answer angrily, not wanting the two Nimrods in front of me to feel secure. Do I have a problem? No, but I believe that you do. Beating an innocent child to a bruised, burnt, and bloody pulp, and for what? To satisfy a selfish desire for dominance. Simply to hurt him? Have you any real reason as to why you abuse an innocent child who has done you no wrong? If you do, I would love to hear it. The young woman screamed at me with equal rage, "You don't understand anything, old man. Go back to whatever old folks' home you came from, or you could bust out a hip." She had a purpose, and I could see it. A perverted one, but not one with truly terrible purpose. However, the boy's narrative was quite different. His frenzied laughter and the look he naturally gave off were clear indicators of his motivations. Hatred, pure and unadulterated. They're both about as messed up as I was when I was younger, and they referred to me as a old man. The man who hasn't aged in centuries. They are not only simple-minded, stupid fools, but also deluded sickos. I reply swiftly, clearly taking them by surprise, "You are correct. I know nearly nothing of your intentions. Please, do enlighten me." Not even the girl could come up with a reasonable answer. Maybe all this time I had misjudged her motives. Perhaps I'm not as intelligent as I believed. I start to add, "I am still waiting for an answer," but the young man interrupts. "I am going to blast you into the next century if you don't shut your trap." I must admit that this comment made me laugh. That would imply nothing at all, even if he could. Compared to the length of my life, a century is nothing. And I couldn't be killed by any number of blasts. No more. I decided to stop laughing as it was obvious that they were perplexed. I glared at them for a few seconds before sighing in boredom and annoyance. Izuku still required medical help, and I had veered off course. As I scream in frustration, "You think that you, a feeble-minded, half-witted, senseless lunatic of a child can do anything of that sort to me? You are as delusional as you are psychotic. I have had it with your ludicrousy." I feel the curse I was blessed with start to activate in both of my eyes for the first time in a good few years. Making eye contact with both of them, I smile. "Lelouch v Britannia commands you, both of you, disperse at once." After a moment, their eyes turn red and they almost blindly nod their heads in denial of my request. At the same moment, they say in a tone devoid of emotion, "Yes, Your Majesty." Then, robotically, they turn around, get to their feet, and leave the alley toward Izuku's house. I hurried to where Izuku lay, nearly motionless. I feared that he would be scared or believe that I had misled him about my quirklessness after realizing that I had utilized my Gios in front of him. Izuku's perspective. It goes without saying that he has a peculiarity. By merely saying his name and giving an order, he was unable to get Kachan to leave with Izumi. God forbid, it's Izumi and Kachan. When they were gone, he hurried over to help me up while checking me for serious injuries. I was okay because, for the most part, I only really got reruns of past interactions. He helped me get to my feet and supported me as I limped back into his convenience store. For the most part, the walk was quiet, but for the sound of our footsteps scuffing the motionless ground and the man's labored breathing. He was now known as Lelouch. Where have I previously heard that name? He escorted me to an unoccupied seat as we entered the convenience store. With the warmest smile his piercing face could generate, he reassured me, "Don't worry, kid, I'm gonna get you some first aid." I simply nodded in agreement, usually letting my mother or myself handle this. Soon later, he came back carrying a kit of materials that were obviously marked first aid. After unzipping the packet, he spent a few moments searching through it before I stopped him. "So, your name is El Lelouch?" The question made him wince for a while, and then he slowly turned to face me. I'm not sure why, but he winced once more when he saw my face. Did he think I would be angry? He answered slowly, "Yep, that's my name. I apologize for not having told you sooner." Then, as if unwilling to go on, he returned to his search. "I had one more question, though." He stopped rummaging entirely when I said in a strained tone, "Do you have a quirk?" He gazed up at me gravely, but remained silent. "IW won't be upset." "Why, you can tell me. I would think that it's pretty cool." He lets out a deep sigh after what seems like a minute of stillness, and then he stares directly into my eyes. He begins, "I don't have a quirk." which makes me think he's lying. I tilt my head in perplexity as he goes on. I have something far different from anything like that. You cannot see my power, nor can anybody else, except for a select few. Its alias is known as the power of the king, and it is more of a curse than any quirk. He eventually completes his search and comes forward to assist with treatment, but I lean forward slightly, wanting him to go on with his explanation. He states solemnly, it is more commonly known as Gios. I found the term, Gios, intriguing, yet perplexing. Gios? I ask. Yes, Gios. It is a supernatural power that is quite different to that of quirks. A quirk is a genetic mutation which passed down through generations, but Gios is far from genetic. It is a power that is granted to certain individuals, which typically revolves around the alteration of someone's perception or senses within certain circumstances or scenarios. He went on for approximately a minute, looking down at all times. I was given this power ages ago, by a woman with long green hair, and quite the peculiar name. This is a power I haven't even thought of using in ages, as the last time I did use it, it caused a world war that shaped the globe into what it is today. That last sentence really perplexed me. What had he done, and why was he telling me now if he had been so secretive about it? This curse gives me the ability to give any single person one command that they will follow without question, as long as I make eye contact with them. Years ago, I used this power to do abominable things across the planet, creating an order of incredible warriors, and betraying everybody's trust along the way. He said slowly, as his body started to shake. He was obviously grieving deeply, and the things he had done continued to haunt him. With each line he uttered, my confusion only grew. But in the end, with my death, peace was restored across the globe, and the few people who cared for me had semi-happy endings. Yet of course, with the development of quirks, that peace quickly ran away from reality. Even though I strived for peace, I can't go back. I can't do what I did again. Never again. He spoke in a nervous voice that cracked in agony and occasionally rose in pitch. In an attempt to console him, I extended my hand and placed it on his shoulder. I began slowly before gaining the confidence I needed to pose the inquiry I had in mind. Though I don't agree with what I assume your methods may have been. Why your goal was just. His head flew up, and he peered into my eyes in terror and shock. Lelouch, if you can't fight that fight anymore. Could you give me the power to do it instead? He asked. I gather my strength and give him a confident look in return. Did you not hear a damn word I said? This power is a curse. It can do terrible things. Are you mad? I exclaim. Quirks are no different, except for where they come from. I know what you did was wrong, and I know that it is strong, but I can take it. He doesn't say anything and looks into my eyes for a few seconds, but I don't waver and maintain my assured stare. I sag a little in my seat as he begins. A Gios user cannot give out a Gios. After lowering his shirt collar to display a red marking at the very top of his chest, he concludes, unless they have a code. He says in a severe tone, maintaining eye contact throughout the tirade, listen kid, I know you are smart, and your drive is inspiring, but this is a huge thing. I am assuming you wish to become a hero. But this power can either make or break people. This is your last chance to back out and stop conversing with me. Lelouch waits a few seconds before placing his hand on my shoulder and saying, Lelouch, if it means I can help people, then I will do whatever it takes. I'm ready. After that, I had a blank mind and had multiple visions. A bloody conflict, a massive white and gold mech, a large chlorid red and magenta mech, a number of individuals who appeared to be nobility, and a mask. A mask that seemed oddly familiar. I kept thinking the same word again and over. Nothing. As I drifted through my empty mindscape, I was told of my contract, which I immediately accepted. The words, in Lelouch's voice, shot through my empty head. The power of the king will isolate you from society. You will walk among humans, but live a different life, with different rules, and a different standing. If you accept this contract, you will be accepting these terms. My wounds had been attended to when I awoke, and I felt distinct. With all the pain still present but lessened, I felt normal. But I knew in my head. I was aware that something was wrong with me. I was in control now. I slowly muttered, Lelouch. We have the same Gios. As I gazed down at the floor in wonder and saw my eye turn crimson, revealing the identical marking from Lelouch's chest. He said, no. You have a stronger one. I nodded silently, understanding what he had likely understood. If I were unrestrained, I would be dangerous. Come by the shop whenever you can. You have much to learn, and several people to meet. All I could do was nod. Now I was in control. The king's authority. It would reset at the end of each month, and I would have 2 commands for each individual I spoke with. I could do almost anything as long as I look you in the eye. I couldn't get arrogant, though, not right now. Never. With a renewed sense of resolve, I slowly stood up and staggered out of the building. I would have to go back soon because I know that I will become a threat to society if I don't fortify my intelligence, will, and commitment. After a lengthy walk, I stand at the base of my house and open the door to a fresh future. About 2 days after I got home, my mother saw my wounds and gave me the customary frantic scurrying care. My red essence started to dry and saturated my clothes, ruining my green sweatshirt, black trousers, and a simple white shirt, though it wasn't as obvious on the pants as it was on the other articles of clothing. When Izumi and Kachan spotted me, they appeared to have forgotten the entire situation, but they were nonetheless upset because I was still grinning. After being hurried to bed, I lay there for perhaps 2 days. From bread and muffins to the basic katsudon, which has always been my favorite food, Mom would bring me plates of homemade food. It was obviously done with love and affection, which further increased my admiration for my mother. However, I was only able to ponder about my new power while I was in bed. I have the ability to control the wills of whomever I look upon. A terrifying, perilous, and amazing power that could someday devour me if I'm not careful. I complied with Lelouch's request because of that fear, and as soon as I had my mother's approval, I headed back toward the convenience store where Lelouch lived. As soon as I got there, I introduced myself. "Lelouch? I'm here, like you asked. Hello? Is anybody there?" I exclaim, raising my voice as loudly as I can manage, despite its slight volume. I was going to make another call when I was abruptly cut off. I heard a smooth, impersonal, yet almost angelic voice ask, "So, you are the boy I have heard so much about?" Without any obvious malice or ill will. I turn around in bewilderment, searching for the whereabouts of the feminine voice, and finally spot a woman with long, vivid green hair who appears to be rather young. She sat on the chair that I had long ago been prohibited from using, and her face was blank. I hastily ask, Who are you? Where's Lelouch?" Out of terror, I hear Lelouch's voice respond from behind with a little laugh, "I'm right here, Izuku. But right now, I think you should be talking with her." He smiles warmly but devilishly, adding, "I may have given you your Gios, but she is much more legible with this kind of topic." The woman was embracing the Cheese-kun plush toy on the chair when I slowly nodded my head and turned to face her. "So, Lelouch gave you a Gios, correct?" She inquires without even looking at me. "Yes, but how do you even know about Gios? Did Lelouch tell you too?" "Wait, but he said that you were more legible. What did he mean by that?" She answers my question with a little sass, placing her hand beneath her bangs and tugging them up to reveal the same marking that was on Lelouch's breast. Of course I would know about Gios. I am the one who gave him his Gios after all. When I understood exactly what that meant, my eyes widened. Compared to Lelouch, this woman knew even more about Gios. "Your Gios is pretty similar to Lelouch, with the fundamentals and basic components of it, yet it is even stronger and more potent than his ever was. As I am sure he has already explained, you are now a walking calamity. If your Gios goes out of control, then you could do something truly terrible. We, along with 2 more individuals, will be helping you with training not just your mind, but your body, and will. Do these arrangements suit your wishes?" She continues to rant in a monotone voice, now using full eye contact all the time. "They do, miss, and I am thankful for the chance to improve myself and try to make a difference," I reply, grinning as broadly as I can. The woman smiled at me for the first time during our talk. The moniker was very odd, but I felt it was impolite to inquire, so I kept my ideas to myself. "You asked me who I was earlier, correct? Well, you may call me CC. It is a pleasure to meet you, Ms. CC." While still holding Cheese-kun, she said, "Please, call me Mrs. CC. I am a married woman after all." My voice breaks a few times as I say, sorry, I didn't know that. Who are you married to?" I glance back at Lelouch and notice that he blushes a little, so I turn my head away. As I allowed my inner thoughts to control me, realization struck like a speeding train. So I let out a really high-pitched cry of shock. "Wha?" Lelouch screamed in exasperation. "Jesus Christ, Izuku. Shut your trap, will ya?" I recoiled and leapt back. CC was laughing a little in the background while Lelouch started berating me for being so loud and emotional. Lelouch sighs with exhaustion and gives me a long look. He murmured slowly before breaking into a tiny, narrow-eyed smile. "In all of my hundreds of years of living, I haven't seen a child quite like you. Trust me, Lelouch, I had to deal with you for a year, and you could act annoying sometimes as well," CC uttered in jest, while she was still laughing. I soon realized how long these two have been alive when they started arguing. Their entire experience. Everything they know. They were going to give me all of that. I couldn't disappoint them right now. I looked anxiously at Lelouch, and he and CC ceased their light-hearted repartee and became nearly quiet. Finally, Lelouch dug behind the counter and took out a plastic bag containing plain chips, saying, "Izuku, you may go back to your residence. Use this as your excuse for leaving. Tomorrow, you will be meeting two new people. Two of the people I trust most in this disgusting world, filled with lies, deceit, and crime all over. They will aid you in the physical apartment, while I will aid you in knowledge and tactics." I nod in agreement, eager to get started on my training in the days ahead. I turned to go after nodding and accepting the plastic bag with a bow of gratitude. Lelouch's perspective. "So, that was the boy, huh? He is just as adorable as I had imagined," CC said. With a strange display of parental feeling, she exclaimed to me, "Adorable? I haven't ever heard you say that word before. Is he that special? I just thought he was intelligent and was a fun chat." For the first time in a long time, she smiled brightly at me, as if she had just been handed the keys to Pizza Hut and had 48 hours to go crazy. "Of course he is. Did you see those freckles, or that perfectly head-pattable bush of hair? He looks even more cuddly than Cheese-kun," she exclaimed. As soon as she understood what she was saying, she returned her dispassionate gaze. I laugh a little at her theatrics, relishing how much her behavior deviates from her usual manner. "But of course, he is your apprentice, and already has a mother. I have no right to act that way around him, it would be insulting." As I reflect about the day after we had rescued Nunnally from the late Princess Shamna and her order at Zilkstan, I remark, "I am sure you wouldn't mind another supportive figure in his life. I know I didn't mind when you joined me on my quest for a new life." With a sardonic tone and another of her taunting looks, she added, "Joined you? If I recall properly, it was you who joined me." She then left Cheese-kun on the seat she had chosen and stood up. "Even if that is true, you still agreed to marry me that day. Even if it was an unconventional proposal, you did agree to be my one and only. You have supported me since the day I first got my Gios. You were my partner in crime. Now you are my life partner. What I mean to say, is that support can go a long way." In response to my diatribe, she looks into my eyes and says, "Perhaps there is some truth to that statement." Of course there is. And besides, it has been centuries. If we can't conceive a child, what is so wrong with treating a child like our son? I inquire, peering into her eyes. Even though we used to joke around and fight a lot, I knew that attending the truck accident that fateful day was the proper decision. In response, CC approaches me and puts her arms around me in an embrace, saying, "Maybe you are right." I gave her a hug in return while massaging her back in calming circles. We remained silent like that until the chime of the bell caused CC to grudgingly enter the rear as I assisted the paying client. Izuku's perspective. That evening, I came home grinning with excitement and one bag of plain chips wealthier. I'm excited to see who I'll be meeting tomorrow after meeting Mrs. CC. They must be close friends and possess extraordinary physical talent based on Lelouch's description of them. I heard a lot of shouting coming from the kitchen as soon as I opened the front door of my house. While Mom and Dad were yelling at one another, Izumi sat at the dinner table with her head down. This was a very uncommon occurrence because my mother is a kind, non-aggressive individual who usually is happy with her role in the family. But the things that were pouring out of their mouths were quite different from her or what I had observed in my father. This was a severe matter. I chose to hide around a corner so as not to draw attention to myself or obstruct their path. I wanted to see what body language they were using, so I peered out from behind that corner. Mom's tone broke with every decibel she raised, as she screamed angrily, "For the last time, Toshi, you have seen the proof, you have seen it for years. Izuku comes home with not only burns, but bruises that can't be possible without the help of, you guessed it, telekinesis. When are you going to accept the fact that she has been abusing her little brother?" Dad answers in a deep, harsh voice, his electric blue irises glaring at her. I have talked to her about it, and yes, she admitted to roughhousing with him a bit, but I don't understand why you would call that abuse. She loves her little brother, and would never willingly hurt him. You can say she loves him so many times, yet has she ever said it? Have you ever said it since he was pronounced quirkless? He has been fighting against so many people, including you, and our daughter. You were blind to his pain, because you never even bothered to look at him. Mom started to cry because shaking with emotion. It was obvious that this was negatively affecting her present mental and physical health because she is just as emotional as I am. I hadn't even considered what might have happened next. I watched as my dad's body started to develop and enlarge, giving him a big, recognizable muscular frame. His blonde hair rose up, and his normally slender frame rapidly expanded into a towering, extraordinarily well-built man who I, much to my dismay, knew all too well. All power. The greatest hero. Dad yelled angrily, his voice now as loud as a freight train. Watch your tone in my household, Inko. I may spend more time with Izumi, and that is because she can become a hero, and that is because she has the heart to do it. The fact that you'd call my daughter a villain is simply disgusting. I started to retreat because I couldn't comprehend what was going on. My hero, All Might, who has supported me and kept my dream alive for years, was the father who, for more than 10 years, never cared to speak to me. I stumbled over a piece of paper as I was backing away, and the house echoed with a loud thump. Mom is scared, All Might is shocked, and Izumi is perplexed as they all turned to face me. I looked at them in terror as I sat my ass on the floor. Had they been keeping this a secret from me all along? Izumi was obviously aware of this, and I find it difficult to accept that Mom was unaware of it. How long had they been hiding things from me? Mom began, Aizuku. We can explain. But I was in such shock that I didn't remember her words until a few seconds after the experience. As I tried to process all of this information, I glanced down and saw the piece of paper I had slid on. Divorce agreement was written in large, strong characters at the top of the page. I instantly started to hyperventilate, which made my mother start to worry and come over to me. But I was only focused on one thing. My mom is about to have a breakdown, my hero was against me, and now they're divorcing each other. Due to me. Unable to handle the tension, I scurried to my feet and rushed in the direction of my room. You might wonder why I didn't rush to the front door. Well, I still occasionally ask myself the same question. I'm happy I didn't, though. I went to my bed, snatched up my pillow, slammed my door shut, and just yelled into it. A knock on my door was heard, but I chose to ignore it. It was too much for me to handle. Finally, the tears started to fall from my wet eyes, and the agony of my yelling only increased. My family was split up because of me. My beatings were due to me. I was to blame for everything. The knocking eventually ceased, and I heard someone unlock my door. Mom was standing there when I turned to face my door. Sniffing back the emotions, she approached me gently before giving me a hug. In a quiet, compassionate voice, she said, It's okay, honey. Jay, just slow down. Take a few deep and slow breaths for me, okay? As my mother held me in her tender hug, I nodded softly and started to gradually settle my breathing. Being surrounded exclusively by the goods of my father and the guy my mother was divorcing felt so wrong, but all I could take in was her trembling body and the absence of the typical lavender scent. It wasn't just me that required assistance. I encircled her in my arms and squeezed her just enough to make her feel comfortable but not so hard as to cause harm. My attempt to speak, I'm sorry, Mom. It's all my fault, is abruptly interrupted. She pulled me in and placed her face in the crook of my neck, saying, no, it's their fault. For not giving a damn about you. If they can't give you a good life. Then I don't want to be a part of that painful existence. I couldn't stop the tears from falling down my freckled cheeks and onto her shoulder, so I started crying again right away. Neither Izumi nor her father visited to see how she was doing. After today, it was obvious that Mom and I would be alone. I suppose it was worthwhile to get that part-time work last year. When we finally parted ways, our faces were both red from uncontrollable flushes and tears. I stare into her eyes as softly as possible, still unable to speak coherently, and tell her, Mom, just know that you won't be alone, okay? I'll always be here for you. She gently nods and gives me that lovely, warm grin that has made every day of the past 10 years better. With a warm smile, I say, thank you, Izuku. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, just wanted to. It's okay, Mom. It would have hurt no less if you told me sooner. It's going to be okay. I feel another tear fall down my cheek and fall from my chin to my pants. After a difficult day and a lengthy walk, my eyes felt tired and I was ready to fall asleep. I was so inebriated that I didn't even think about my mother, but as I started to nod asleep, her eyes also started to close. The sound of gentle snoring soon followed as we both lay down simultaneously. It should come as no surprise that I had one of my better sleeps that night. I anticipated awkward quiet as we woke up the following morning, realizing the predicament we were in. Her eyes opened slowly, but as soon as she saw me, she gave me a motherly kiss on the forehead and promptly broke into a small, sweet smile. Good morning, honey. My nervousness instantly vanished like a snowflake on bare flesh at that point, and I smiled back at her. I reply softly as I approach to give her a hug, Morning, Mom. After a brief embrace, we regretfully get out of bed and part ways with one another. Izumi and Dad weren't in my room when we left, but the page I had slipped on the night before was now on the kitchen table. I saw some text at the bottom of the page that hadn't been there before as I was making my way to the table. It was signed by Dad. I heard Mom approach from behind and pause at the table, perhaps taking note of the paper's change. I turned to face her, and she sighed deeply. She looked at the floor and whispered softly, "So, I guess that's that." After giving her a quick embrace to check on her, I discovered that she was doing well. Without raising a single decibel, she stated in a low voice, "It's been building up for the past few months. I saw this coming a mile away." While she merely nods in agreement, I continued in an equally low voice, "Don't worry, Mom, I'm not going to leave you. Not like him." After releasing her from my grip, I turned to face the time. Lelouch and CC would need to meet with me, soon. I raised myself to make my plea after taking a grudging sip of my accumulated saliva and inhaling the agonized atmosphere in the house. With a heart the size of a neutron star, I say, "Hey Mom, I need to head somewhere right about now. I hope you feel better and that your day gets better, but I really have to get there." This brings my gaze to the plated flooring of our normally peaceful family home. She gives me a soft smile and nods to confirm that I have been granted permission to take a break. I nod in gratitude and race to the front door to pick up my shoes. Calling my mother again, I open the front door and head back toward the convenience shop. I needed to meet some folks. Izuku's perspective. I finally pause in front of the same building where I was given the almost godlike power that I haven't yet used after a comparatively brief period of continuous jogging. I inhaled deeply before opening the door, which closed behind me as I heard the familiar tinkling of the light bell. I came to some realizations there. The place where I had first heard the term, Lelouch, came back to me. Lelouch v Britannia, the 99th Emperor of the now-defunct Britannia. Following the disappearance of Zero, a well-known icon, war criminal, vigilante, and brilliant strategist prior to the days of oddities, he abruptly reappeared after years of absence following his exile by his own father, the 98th Emperor, Charles Z. Britannia. Everyone immediately acquiesced when he declared that he had killed Charles and was now the Emperor. I soon came to the conclusion that Gios most likely played a significant role in that submission. He then swiftly proceeded to declare war on the recently established United States of Japan, and all of the participating independent countries, so declaring war on the entire world. He acquired the power of the Damocles and the Flya nuclear weapon after subduing the brilliant Schneisel El Britannia in battle, and he then seized control of the entire planet. His reign was short-lived, as the masked vigilante Zero triumphantly returned and killed him shortly after. When DNA reading technology became available, the individual wearing the mask was eventually apprehended, before Japan was dubbed Area 11. At the time, Suzaku Kurorugi, the son of the late Japanese Prime Minister, was the presumed deceased Knight of Zero, Lelouch's right-hand man, and the man behind the mask. He and Colin Kazuki, the Black Knight's ace pilot and the lady thought to have killed Kurorugi, vanished on separate missions long ago and never came back. Until now, that is. Because two of the people I respected the most in the pre-quirk era were standing here in front of me. Suzaku Kurorugi and Colin Kazuki. They were both as youthful as when they were at their best. I had no idea how. As Colin struggled to contain her laughter, I noticed Lelouch standing behind them with a sly smile. I didn't know, but I seemed to react oddly. I instantly collected myself, and my face returned to its normal shape, albeit with a slight flush. I just know I'm in need of answers. It would be an understatement to say that I was perplexed. Colin. Killed. Suzaku decades ago, and he was 0 millennia before. They ought to be much past their prime, if not dead. But here they were, still as young as when they were at the height of their fame during the Zero Requiem, one suppressing her laughing and the other smiling at me in amusement. I stood in utter quiet, trying to figure out how they could possibly be here. Did they use codes like CC and Lelouch? No, something didn't seem quite right. Suzaku may have possessed a Gios at the time, based on his actions, but it didn't seem appropriate to have a code. The stillness was broken only by Colin's wild laughter before Lelouch finally spoke. I nodded slowly while remaining as silent as possible. Now, from your reaction, I am sure you know who these two are? I asked. My face twisted in complete bewilderment as he went on, adding, "Well, before you ask, no, they do not have codes." My mind had melted to the consistency of pancake batter. I felt a hand on my shoulder and he said, "Well, I think it would be for the best if I let CC take care of this." I noticed CC when I looked sideways, staring at me blankly as usual. Before I could speak, my body began to lighten and my thoughts began to become confused, just as when I first got my Gios. I had multiple flashbacks of various individuals that I now knew to be Suzaku, Colin, Lelouch, the late Britannian royal family, and even CC. I awoke slowly and opened my eyes to discover that I was standing in an unfamiliar location. A number of pillars, or parts of pillars, were present. There was a big stairway for me to ascend, and the sky was lovely and boundless. I ascended the stairs and looked out over the boundless horizon, mesmerized by the physics and beauty of such a location. I slowly inquire, what is this place? In an attempt to ascertain the true nature of this location, previously known as the Sword of Akasha, it is now simply referred to as the Gate. I nearly tripped when I heard CC speak abruptly, and after a moment of awkward silence during which her golden irises were illuminated by the bright light from the eternal horizon, she looked at me and said, "I apologize if I startled you, I just wanted to answer your question." She moved up behind me as I returned to marveling at the limitless sea of color and light, and I nodded my head in agreement after taking a deep breath. I was curious about a few things, so I turned my neck slightly to gaze at the immortal with the lime hair. How come this location is known as the Gate? Because it is a gate between reality and limbo in a sense, I said, looking at the woman's expressionless face for a hint of any emotion or response. She finally closed her eyes and smiled slightly as she said, "We have access to areas and locations here that are inaccessible to others." "Like what, Mrs. CC?" I tilt my head curiously, taking in all the facts with an open mind. After meeting two immortals, nothing was truly impossible to me anymore. A world in which age, reality, and limbo are all nearly irrelevant. The world of C is a world. She answered carefully, as though she wanted me to process everything. A world acquired in the afterlife, or by code Wilders. Time flows differently in the world of C than it does in the world you are most familiar with. The laws of time shift after you cross the gate, allowing you to grow slowly while the world goes on without you. At the gate, time moves normally. Almost everybody from the past can be seen in the world of C. Lelouch gave Suzaku, Colin, and even a select few others the opportunity to essentially become immortal centuries ago, but only those two took him up on the offer. All in order to teach the next generation of Gios users. "Izuku, that would be you." Throughout her statement, she smiled at me like the sun in the morning, bright and warm, but hazy, cold, and emotionless. All these centuries of waiting, knowledge, and their combined efforts were now for me, just to put more strain on my already stressful life. Niece. "Izuku, we all wish you the best. We've been told by Lelouch how your life has been going so far, and we're all here to listen and support you. If you make a mistake or struggle, don't worry. We are all here to help you get better." CC replied in a tone that surprised me. It was almost maternal and as warm as her grin from a few moments ago. I looked around and saw Suzaku standing there as Colin started to enter the picture, and I nodded in response, still unsure of myself but not wanting to let anyone down. "She's right, Izuku. Even if none of us are flawless, we still want to see you get better. We all deserve some peace of mind after what we've been through, knowing that you will continue our traditions in your own unique way." His opening remarks surprised me, and despite my mind racing at the idea of a military hero standing right in front of me, I nodded silently. "Geez, Suzaku, you really are the Prime Minister's son," he said. Colin teased, "You act like a motivational speaker." Suzaku spun on his heel, his blush so bright that he could lead Santa through a snowstorm. "Hey, Colin, not at this time. Look, what this idiot was trying to say is, we have your back," he replied in a desperate and embarrassed manner, which made us both burst out laughing. They were little older than me. "We've got you covered, so you don't need to worry about being alone." With a toothy grin and a loud tone, Colin gave me the thumbs up. Watching the two of them continue to argue, I nodded in answer. "Oh, I can tell," CC said, laughing lightly. "You will have to get used to this, honey, it is quite common." My eyes brightened as I nodded enthusiastically. "I absolutely agree, Mrs. CC. I really should be sure of my readiness for something like that. I will show you where the gate leads to someday, but before that, I think you should go through your training." "Well, I should bring you back to reality if you agree. You have training to participate in." I nod back, listening to the knuckles cracking and the quiet arguing between Colin and Suzaku behind me. I woke up, sitting on one of the benches in Lelouch's convenience store, and as I looked around, I soon saw Suzaku and Colin staring at me from the other side of the room. Her hand touched me, and I felt my body grow light again, and my consciousness dissolve. Colin soon stood up and came up to me, saying, "Well, Lelouch instructed us to train you, so would you like to get started right away? You want to attend hero school, or something like that and become a hero, don't you? So let's just get started." I was energized and eager to start working after hearing her say it with enthusiasm. Well, I don't see why I shouldn't cooperate. Suzaku sighs in the background as I reply with similar vigor. Well, a convenience shop isn't the place to do this. With a slight smile, he turned and headed for the door, saying, let's start with a little jog over to where we will actually be training. As you desire, sir. I say this as a sign of compliance, but he turns around and stops me immediately away. There's no need for formalities, just behave like we know one another. Okay. After waiting for a bit, I nodded quickly and gave him a little smile because I hadn't had one of those in years and wasn't sure how to respond to a new acquaintance. We started jogging at that point, and for about 12 minutes we just jogged while periodically joking about and asking each other questions. I asked most of the questions. After a few more minutes, we arrived at our goal. The lights came on as I entered the foreign building, followed closely by Colin and Suzaku, and I saw a vast room with tires, weights, hanging ropes, and even a matted area for sparring. We will all be getting changed, and then effective immediately, your training will begin. I took a nervous gulp, but I nodded my head and slowly stood up, following Suzaku toward the male training room, fearing what these two amazing war heroes would do to me on the sparring mat. Eventually, I was pushed into the room from behind. Suzaku and Colin both entered behind me, giving me knowing glances. I couldn't give up, though, not right now, never. Izuku's perspective. About 5 months have passed since that first day, and it goes without saying that my dread was well-founded. When I initially started training, Colin threw me around like a rag doll, and Suzaku played with me while I launched myself at him in the hopes of at least hitting him. I was only able to raise the weights for a few seconds because they felt like they were shredding my flesh by the second, but that's how it started, as I mentioned. I was able to lift the weights for a little longer around month 3, and occasionally I was able to hit Suzaku. Colin, however, would not let me breathe and would always deck me. Suzaku would always stop and give me advice, teaching me new moves and techniques to use in specific situations, while Colin would wipe her forehead with her shirt and mutter, "What a dumbass." During my free time, I would just study up with Lelouch, who would recount all of his previous conflicts as Zero, his time as Britannia's emperor, and his most famous exploits, like using a city's structure to collapse and almost establish an independent nation just months after he came out, or his use of the Sakuradite mines on Mount Fuji to explode and destroy the world fleet. At the gym, I gradually discovered how to use my body and mind in unison, learning how to take use of both. Even though Suzaku was still holding back and teaching me more in depth, Colin was also starting to soften up. Sometimes she would hold back like Suzaku, but whenever I got the upper hand, she would quickly drop that and punt me like a soccer ball. By the time I reached my 5th month, I had made significant progress and was able to lift the 150-pound weights on a regular basis. She frequently uses the changing room, so I can never truly tell, even though I swear sometimes that her cheeks are flushed. I sat on a bench, sipping copious amounts of lemon-flavored water, gasping in desperation as my life flashed before my eyes as I fought Colin Kazuki, the crimson-glazed cartridge of rage, after pleading with her to give me her all. Suzaku came over and sat beside me, silently sipping from his own water bottle. Without even looking at me, he placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You fucked up," I said, without hesitation, "Yep." We both nodded and resumed drinking our water. Suzaku and I had become rather close, and it would be an understatement to say that he was a wonderful buddy. But me and Colin, I am her punching bag. We joke about sometimes, but it seems like we still have awkward discussions. She first tried to talk to me, but I believe that simply by being here, I may have discouraged her from even trying to be social with someone like me. I sat in solitude for a time before getting up and moving toward the changing areas. "Are you heading home?" "Yeah, I don't think that I am in a state of mind where I could do much more," Suzaku yelled at me from the bench. "I want to spend time with my mom before I go to UA. Plus Christmas is just a month away, so I need to see her anyhow." Suzaku gestured for me to leave after grinning. I walked into the changing room after turning around, but something was different. The walls were different, the floor was much more intact, the lockers looked different, and I could hear a shower running. I soon realized my mistake when the shower turned off and someone started to leave the shower area. I stood in the women's changing room now, frozen in shame and terror as I stared at Colin Kazuki, who had a towel slung over her shoulders that did a terrible job of hiding even an inch of her body. I was now positive that she was flushed, and I was flushed even more, so we both kept quiet. I felt terrible and perverse for my mistake, and I slapped my hands over my eyes before muttering a few frantic excuses before the inevitable freakout or flipout. However, neither of them showed up. Colin's perspective. 5 months prior. Even though he is a good child, I have to give him some tough love if he wants to get stronger, so I strolled onto the sparring mats, quickly struck a stance, and glared daggers at the tiny novice. Come on over, Midoriya. I tried to talk him into it by saying, the only way to know your limits is to give it a try. His posture and distance from me made it obvious that he wasn't comfortable hitting people yet, and that he was likely even more nervous because I'm a girl. While some would call that sexism, I would describe it as reasonable instinct. Come on, Mido. Simply punch someone, I can handle it, so don't worry about me. I tried to agitate him by saying, if it lands that is, but he raced toward me and delivered a weak punch, so I sidestepped him and used a backhand to swat him down. I could see a spark in his eye. Mito, don't feel too horrible. That was your first try. You're here to get better, not to start flawless. He quickly accepted my offer to help him up, and I noticed a slight flinch on his end as well as a brief flush form on his cheeks. I said passionately, giving him a grin as I reached down to help him up. Thank you, Colin, he said quickly. This was the face of a boy who had not had his hand held in a long time and who obviously thought that touch was harmful, but I couldn't help but blush and be enamored with his adorable smile. I helped him up and kept smiling at him, but I quickly withdrew my hand from him before it became strange. As he climbed onto the mat next, Suzaku gave me a playful backslap. I went to the restroom and glanced in the mirror, pleading that I was mistaken, but I noticed a slight red flush on my cheeks, which amply confirmed my suspicions. I'm already becoming softer. 3 months prior. Izuku's performance has improved significantly since that initial weak blow. By improved, I mean improved against Suzaku. He can now throw a better punch against me, but it never lands. I could easily body chuck the poor guy across the mat because of his slim build, but I don't do that to him very often. He can fight Suzaku fairly well, but Suzaku is holding back a lot, which I believe is an attempt to avoid giving Izuku the same amount of PTSD that he gave Lelouch. I watched them spar on the mat as normal from the bench, Suzaku plainly just evading, and I gave the poor kid advice as he threw out random strikes. After a good minute, Suzaku landed on one foot after jumping to avoid a leg sweep, but it seemed like it was Izuku's goal. As soon as he landed, I witnessed Suzaku take a vicious uppercut to the chin for the first time in decades, and the hardest thing I had ever had to do while teaching him was to not celebrate. Apologies, Suzaku. Izuku yelled in a panic, rushing to check on him. To his and my surprise, Suzaku just started laughing. Not in a crazy way like Mr. Lamperouge at the convenience store, but in a sincere and joyful way. And eventually Izuku started laughing with him, smiling as brightly and widely as the Pacific Ocean in the morning light. My cheeks had been turning the same crimson color, but each time it became more noticeable, until now it was dangerously obvious, and I could feel the heat dancing across my cheeks as I pushed myself to look away from the two of them and headed back toward the bathroom to avoid their sight. I was terrified of the feelings I was experiencing, and my cheeks only turned this way after I glanced at that jerk, Izuku. Why is it him? He's my junior, my kohai, and I poop his ass every day and train him, so why does he make me feel this way? Even though I don't like him in that way, why do my cheeks go hot? Why do I want to be near him? Why does his smile make my heart race? Why do I not detest these emotions? Today, to say that my heart hurt would be an understatement. He asked me to stop holding back today, and I decided to comply. I practically punched him to the ceiling, and the thud he made when he came back down made me flinch. He fled from me like a dog that has been kicked by its owner. I would simply run back to my small, private changing room and take a shower to distract myself from myself whenever he ran to Suzaku for help or tips, or whenever he was cleaned like a dirty floor, which was kind of painful to watch. I want to see him grow and thrive, but I don't like being so hard on him because I know it scares him. He has already matured a lot and has a nice physique. My goodness, he looks so. Oh my god, what am I thinking? Get your mind off the clouds. He's scared of you, and you treat him like a salad every day. Oh no, this shower is supposed to help me decompress, not give me more ideas about that moron. That green bean. That baka. That charming, devoted, and robust green bean. God. I'm talking to myself about the boy I like in my head like I'm going insane. What is love? Please don't hurt me, baby. What in the world am I thinking? I need to stop thinking about that green bean and that dumb music. The door to the changing room was opened as I was having my little internal argument, so I turned off the shower, grabbed a towel, and slowly started to come around the corner. Since Suzaku is always far too aware of everything at all times, it couldn't be him. Izuku would undoubtedly make this mistake, and to be absolutely honest, I just hope it's him. Izuku's perspective. Now, warning. Maybe offensive. Quiet. It was as thick as pound cake, and even if I made a conscious effort to break through it and make a fool of myself, the tension would only get worse. I stood waiting for her to start yelling and yelling, but she didn't say a word. I took the chance and looked up, and as my eyes started to take in the scene, I noticed steam coming from the corner where Colin had come. She was still dripping warm water, and she stood in hushed limbo. No matter how hard I tried to control myself, I couldn't help but look at the body she still wasn't trying to hide when I saw the water dripping. Her skin was clear and smooth, and it gleamed in the slightly dim light of the changing room. Her large bosom was lying in rest, perfectly round, smooth, and perky, and her areolas seemed to have hardened, as they dangled over her toned and fit body, with her abs peeking out from her skin just enough to show off how she shone in the dim light. She approached one of the room's benches and sat down quietly, her long legs and thighs as thick as air, while I subconsciously evaluated her figure against my better judgment. 3 seconds later, she tapped the bench next to her, gesturing for me to take a seat next to her. After swallowing my anxieties and gathering my thoughts, I moved to the bench and sat down beside her, keeping a safe distance so as not to disturb her. The stillness soon returned since I was too anxious to say anything more than the mumbled apology I had just said. I finally heard her voice after another awkward silence. "So, why haven't you treated me with your gios? I mean, you could wipe my memory," she said, without faltering but also without pausing to look at me. "Make me your slave. Make me adore you. Therefore, why haven't you taken any action yet?" I was so troubled by these questions that I promptly snapped my neck at her, asking, "Why would you ever even believe I would do something like that?" With a swift response, she said, "Who wouldn't wish to erase an embarrassing moment? The simplest solution is to manipulate my thoughts, isn't that right?" She answered in a monotone while continuing to gaze solely at the changing room's metal wall. "I understand that I have the ability to do things like that, but that doesn't give me the excuse to indulge in filthy pleasures on unconsenting people," she said, directing my gaze to the wet floor as I struggled to comprehend her logic. "It may be humiliating. However, I must own up to my mistake and be an M-man. I'm so f fucking sore." I started to apologize more politely, but was abruptly interrupted when I was thrown off the bench and into the wet floor. I was unable to object or even comprehend what was happening, and the first thing I noticed was a warm feeling engulfing my chest, which came from a trembling weight that was shakily holding my shirt, her face lodged in the crook of my neck. "Ah, Izu. That was just the reaction I anticipated from you. Way to be predictable, jackass." She laughed, and that made me laugh even more than when her warm embrace had just seconds before bonded me to her. I couldn't speak, and I couldn't even think logically. "What a simple-minded little baka you are. With such a sweet tiny grin. Zuzu, would you like to know a secret?" I had to nod in automatic obedience since her voice was as seductive as her ferocious eyes. "Even if you had used your gios on me, it wouldn't change a thing." She began slowly, looking into my eyes sensuously, and then pressed her moist breasts against my chest, wetting my shirt as she did so. I had my response before I could ask her any questions. "Because I think I already love you." I wasn't sure how I felt about her in that regard, but her words quickly warmed my heart to the point where I felt myself overheating. After a few moments of strangely comfortable silence, we were just staring into each other's eyes, our composure and adrenaline having fled as quickly as my heartbeat, our faces turning the same color as Colin's hair, but she still wouldn't leave my chest. My hand moved unconsciously to her back and shook as it tried to settle her. Listen, Colin. I'm not very good at any of this. But if it's okay." Before I could say anything more, I felt a soft, warm, and moist touch on my lips. I quickly returned the delicate kiss, letting the warmth gradually take away my anxieties. After what seemed like 30 seconds, but was really just 30, she unwillingly withdrew her lips from mine and resumed snuggling her face into my neck, saying, "After today, let's take it a little slower. All right?" I hurriedly nodded in response to her faint, muffled question so as not to further embarrass her. I wasn't the best with girls, romance, or anything that resembled relationships, but I was willing to give it a try. I'm going to try and move on from who I was, and become a new me. With Colin, I think I might be able to change. She had dried herself off and changed into new clothes about 4 minutes later. I'm willing to try, even if I'm not sure about love right now. Izuku's perspective. Month 9's end, standing in the center of the mat after 9 months of training and finally being able to defeat Suzaku in basic hand-to-hand combat. I reflected on the first 5 months of my training. I laughed at the sickly stick figure I used to be, and it made me feel warm and proud to think back on the first time I punched Suzaku or forced Colin to try. It's a little more difficult for me to hit Colin in our sparring matches, but after some confusion and anxiety, we decided that I needed the training if I were to attend UA. Speaking of Colin, I believe that the accident of walking into that changing room was the biggest mistake I could have hoped to make. We had decided on that fateful day to take any romantic action slowly and go at our own pace. It's unbelievable that I've never noticed this before, but every time she smiles, you feel compelled to smile back. It's like a warm wave that comes through my body, and I can't help but adore it. Aside from that, I've also noticed that she is a huge hugger. She just gives me a big squeeze and nuzzles into my neck whenever she is happy, excited, proud of me, or something she accomplished. This is totally out of character for her, but I just think it's so damn cute. I can't help it. Her hugs are so warm, I just adore them. Nevertheless, as I mentioned earlier, I just defeated Suzaku in a no-holds-barred sparring match. I believe I suffered a concussion, and my knee kind of broke in two, but it's not a huge deal. Oh, and another thing I adore about Colin is that she always cheers with the cutest voice, which I never got to hear before, but now that we are dating, I hear it a lot. She is so cute, my goodness. Well, have a look at that. In fact, you defeated me. My internal monologue was interrupted as Suzaku yelled his excitement. I was unable to respond appropriately and could only giggle, my hair a wet mess and beads of sweat streaming down my forehead. They would often say that nothing was more satisfying than watching your student surpass you, but they were actually downplaying the joy. Suzaku exclaimed once again, as he came up to me, and wrapped his arm around my shoulder. What can I say? How could I not get better if I had professors as good as you two? I answered cheerfully, attempting to maintain my poise despite the fact that I felt like I might pass out at any moment. A kick to the back of the head from that fitness enthusiast feels like a goddamn bullet train just rammed into me, even though we were practicing basic hand-to-hand combat and various weaponless fighting techniques. How would I know this? Well, after month 5, I made the decision to ask Suzaku to stop holding back, and boy, do I wish I had waited another month. 4 months prior, at the start of month 6. Izuku's perspective. Suzaku loomed over me with his arms crossed, and I could hear Colin laughing away in the background. Too early, huh? I am currently splayed out on the mat as usual, but with a big gash on my forehead, a bruised leg, and tear-stained cheeks. I scowled at Suzaku as he questioned rudely. I suppose I needed that ass thrashing, to be really honest, since it gave me a new motivation to beat Suzaku's ass, a new objective to strive for. I sat up slowly, holding my head firmly in my left hand and pushing my body up with my right. No. I'll be alright. I slowly responded, giving him an energetic glare, and holding it for as long as I could, before blinking, and looking toward Colin. Be both of you. Don't hold me back. I really must ultimately get better. I attempted to yell, but my voice broke in 50 different ways. They both burst out laughing, despite their alleged best efforts, with Colin leaning against the wall for support while she clutched her chest. Suzaku grabbed my wrist and swiftly pulled me upward as he started talking, saying, "Alright Izuku, but don't blame us when your mom questions your third concussion." He teased me with a big smile, and Colin ran up and jumped onto us, wrapping her arms around our shoulders. As I started to wonder subconsciously, Colin laughed and added, "I bet your mom is wondering where the hell you go every day, after you've been on your own for so long." What's up with my mom? I'll have to ask her later, but I have to concentrate on my training for now. 3 months prior, at the start of month 7. From Inko's perspective. Okay, Mom, I'm leaving right now. In stark contrast to his previous behavior, Izuku called out to me with a broad smile on his face. I have been hearing those same words nearly every day for the past 7 months. I'm not sure where he has been going, but I do know that wherever he is going, it has been helping him a lot. Since Toshi and I got divorced, the house has felt strangely empty but strangely alive. Izuku hasn't been around as much, but he's been happier every day. He occasionally comes home with minor wounds, but he always has the same big smile on his face. I'm not sure what he's been doing, but it seems to be working. At dinner, for the first time since the day before his quirkless diagnosis, we have been having genuine and enjoyable conversations, and to say that he has been laughing again is one of the greatest joys I have ever experienced as a parent. His build reminds me a lot of the build that Toshi had when we were about to go to our first years, but he has been improving it weekly and looks a little younger. I've had a lot more time to myself lately, so I've been able to work out more and talk to my friends more frequently. Mitsuki has been in need of a friend after her recent divorce with Masaru, so the timing is oddly perfect. He's grown so big, and his heart probably grew 3 sizes like the Grinch, because his smile has been a much more common sight lately. Speaking of which, Mitsuki does the same thing with me whenever I was feeling down in high school, so this is nothing compared to the fact that she is currently curled up with me on my living room couch, a tub of ice cream in her hands, and we are both wrapped up under a blanket while we watch some of the most embarrassing Christmas movies ever. Mitsuki, are you sure you're okay? You're hugging that tub like it's a person. I ask with a light chuckle, as she remains silent, not even sparing me a glance. After a few more moments of silence, she changes the topic. I'm sorry. Her abrupt apology took me by surprise and left me perplexed. Mitsuki, what are you apologizing for? I tried to reassure my best friend, who never apologizes in this way, by saying, but Inko. You don't have any reason to feel sorry, you didn't do anything wrong. I still haven't assisted you. You recently went through a divorce as well, and I still need your help. Please pardon me, she murmured, faltering a little as she spoke quietly. I immediately threw my arms around her in a cozy embrace beneath the cover as I listened to her justification for her apologies. It's okay, Mitsuki. With everything happening on right now, we are both under a lot of stress. Both of us are in pain. You don't have to feel sorry for yourself just yet. Because just by being here, you are giving me comfort. Being with you at this moment is as consoling to me as it is to you, Mitsu, my dearest friend. Mitsuki is my best friend, and I would know that better than anyone else. Her usual demeanor, which I realized years ago is just a facade, is actually much kinder and more timid than she lets on. Of course, her temper was definitely not non-existent, but that wasn't what defined her. Eventually, she started hugging me back, tears streaming down her cheeks as she trembled gently in my arms. Thank you, Inko. If we weren't friends, what would I do? Mitsuki asked me with a quiet, almost painful chuckle, as I rubbed soothing circles across her back, my fingers dancing under the war covers of our shared blanket, and across the fabric of her usual purple sweater. Let's not worry about such hypotheticals. All right? Mitsuki nods her head slightly as I reply in a calming voice, let's just try and relax. I heard the front door open and my son's much more assured voice shout out, Mom, I'm home. Before we could go back to our embarrassing movies and the tub of slowly melting strawberry ice cream. I looked up to find him taking off his shoes and coming inside the home with the same joyful smile on his face, which also had some minor scratches and bruises. I tried to reply, but something stopped me, something like choking on your words, but it wasn't physical. I was totally absorbed when he came in from the front porch and went into the kitchen, his smile never changing, and as soon as I realized I had been looking at my own son, I discovered Mitsuki was even more blatantly observing him. Auntie Mitsuki, hello. It's been a long time, Mitsuki spewed out in a hurried manner, looking at the floor in the most blatant way imaginable, which Izuku strangely missed. Oh, hello Izuku. It's nice to see you again. Izuku exclaims in a cheerful tone, obviously thrilled to see her after so long. As if under the influence of a naive incubus, Mitsuki had already gotten up and was heading toward the kitchen before I could change the subject. Wow Izuku. Why you sure have grown up well. She muttered, in stark contrast to her entire demeanor. You think so? I appreciate the compliment, even though I still have a long way to go. Izuku answered with deep appreciation. I leapt from my chair and softly grabbed Mitsuki's wrist, saying, Mitsuki, let's return to our movies. Okay. With my eyes narrowed to the point of glare, I pleaded in a suggestively agitated tone. Oh. Just one more minute, okay. She answered in a voice reminiscent of a Disney film's enthralled damsel. The mediator put out his lovely neck for us both before I could disagree, saying, all right, I'm going to my room to study. When we have time, Auntie, we should catch up, Izuku said in his usual upbeat manner as he picked up his bowl of warmed leftover katsudon and proceeded to his room, closing the door behind him. In the mirror, my cheeks were identical to Mitsuki's, which left me feeling confused and panicked. Mitsuki's cheeks were bright red, and I could see a glimmer of life in her once damp and dead pupils. I sighed in frustration as I led her to the couch, put the ice cream in her arms, and went to the bathroom to cool down. With a broad, mischievous smile that stretched from ear to ear, I noticed Mitsuki staring at me as I waltzed over to the couch. So, Inko. I think you saw what I saw previously. As steam from my ears, I surged forward and pinned her to the sofa. Shut up and watch the damn movie, she asked, her eyes glimmering with eagerness and pleasure. That child is really gorgeous, and you are aware of it. To avoid disturbing Izuku, she uttered the words in a low voice. Yes, this is the Mitsuki that I both love and despise. Izuku's perspective. Today marks the start of the 9th month. After defeating Suzaku 9 months later, I was in the changing room, and this time I was positive that I had gone to the correct one. Suzaku had already departed after taking a shower, but I am still here for, well, I'm not really sure why. After defeating Suzaku, I wanted to run over to Colin and give her a hug for everything she had done for me, but I didn't want to embarrass her. I suppose I just have a lot on my mind right now, and the shower is a strangely soothing place of warm solitude. I felt the warm water melting away the stresses of my labor and the bruises from all 9 hellish months of constant training. After everything she has done for me, I don't want to be a burden, even though she has told me in the past that I can be bold and more open with her. I sighed, turned off the shower, and went outside to dry off with my towel. 7 minutes later, I was dressed in new clothes, and my body felt rejuvenated, but my mind was still confused. It was the same red-headed beauty leaning against the wall as I left the changing room and hurried down the hall toward the front exit as usual. Oh, Colin. Hello. I called out happily, causing her to turn her head in my direction. Her face contorted quickly into an excited smile, as she ran toward me. Izu-kun, she yelled sweetly as she threw me to the ground uncontrollably. The tackle knocked the wind out of me at first, but her thrilled squirming and delighted giggling soon got me back on my high horse. She lifted her head a little, her sapphire eyes looking into my emerald, and I couldn't help but laugh as she nuzzled her head into my chest as I lay on the floor. Izu, I'm so happy for you. I take it you're aware of that. The faint illumination from the ceiling danced across the scarlet strands of hair, naturally rising forward, and her blue sclera shimmered wonderfully. I was unable to come up with a coherent response, so I could only nod. You put so much effort into everything you do. Adversity doesn't change you as a modest lil fool. However, that's precisely what I adore about you. She spoke gently, almost in a whisper, with a small smile on her face the entire time. She went on to say, you have gotten so much stronger. I was so flattered that I couldn't even think of a response. They have been making a lot of efforts to become heroes. I want to stay with you the whole time. All right? With a slight smile on my face, I nodded slowly in answer while closely examining her eyes. After a few moments, Colin got up and helped me up, grasped my hand tightly, and started walking down the hallway with rosy cheeks to match her maroon hair, taking long, confident strides. At first, I could hardly keep up, but I quickly jogged up beside her and walked with her toward the exit. Onwards. Point of view, the present. Hey, are you certain about this, Kale? This is a huge sum of money, I must say. For example, what if a hero discovers? Although both men were masked and armed, along with about 13 other men strewn throughout the room and bags upon bags of hard currency. Possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars. A man of average height asks another man, who is ostensibly named Kale, in a rather hushed tone. Is that the thing you're afraid of? In any event, how many women are in those trucks? We would be in serious trouble if someone found us carrying the bags in the vehicles. Another unnamed man, with big lips visible through its cloth face mask and a bulge in its neck that reminded me of fictional dragons, roared out its concerns in an unusually loud way. Do you two ever stop talking, Jesus? The heroes have either been duped or are complicit in the scheme, and I have already paid off the guards. Before I blow a round down your necks, stop talking so loudly. We're all okay. Those women aren't your concern, as they aren't yours, yelled Kale, an angry man, yelling at the masked men gathered around him. At this point, those bitches are mine, and after I give them to our client, along with the money, we'll have all the nice shit we require. After hearing the truck outside, I jumped from my perch on the ceiling supports and quietly left the building through a window, my hair blowing in the cool winter breeze, and then I climbed up the building's roof after jumping out of the window and headed for the truck, picking up a stone from one of the broken tiles and throwing it to the side of the truck with a tiny but noticeable noise. What the devil? From inside the truck, I heard another man's voice expressing his confusion as he opened the door to investigate the noise. After observing him for about a minute, I leapt down from the roof and silently approached from behind. Using my rather large lighter, I flicked the switch to create a spark, which instantly, thanks to my quirk, turned into a much larger, more sophisticated, deep violet blade of solidified fire. I then thrust the blade through the nameless man's chest, impaling his lung and charring his exposed flesh while burning his all-black clothing. I swung the indigo blade upward before the man could scream, slicing through his upper body, slitting up his neck, and straight through his skull, causing a maroon fluid to seep out of all his exposed pores at a rate that would kill a live man in seconds. Luckily, the bastard was dead, so I left the truck for later because I still had things to do before the women I suspected were trapped inside was safe. Having scaled my way back to the window, I slipped inside and walked across the metal beams to scout the restless men and their ringleader. I had taken out my lighter, affectionately dubbed the ignition stick, and had it fastened to my hip with one hand by its side while I waited for the right time to start the operation and finish it on time. I was far from excited because I could tell that these men would be as dull as the rest of them. I took my chained kunai out of my palm, launched it at a speed no one noticed, and cut through the back of the unfortunate deviant's neck like butter when one of the men finally tripped over a bag of money and slammed their head on the floor in a comical manner, making many of his accomplices laugh a little at his suffering. Kale said in mild irritation, but to no avail, "Hey, dumbass, you can get up now." One of the men soon approached their immobile acquaintance, which prompted 7 more to follow, including the one who joined him and the one who was initially skeptical of the whole situation. Just as they were all about to realize what had happened, I put my thumb and middle finger together while pulling my hand back, and one of the men gasped and staggered back, saying, "He's dead." I swung my hand back out and snapped my fingers, sending a sharp spark blade of pure violet heat toward the group of 7, cutting them all down in seconds, charring through their throats, ribs, chests, veins, and jugulars like a hot knife through a napkin. The 6 men who were left, excluding Kale, started to yell incoherently as Kale prepared his metal quirk, the metal platings creating a large blade that coated his hands, forearms, and sprouted out of his elbows. I threw my chained kunai out of my hand once more, and it lodged directly into the shoulder of another poor bastard. I started to pull myself down toward them at an unwarranted speed, booting them down as I yanked my kunai out of them and swiftly stabbed it into their throat, cutting through it in a satisfying slit. The gravel floors of the once drab warehouse were covered in fresh blood and charred, and I pulled out my ignition stick. You know what, that's not the best name, is it? Still, I stoked my violet blade and scowled at the 6 adversaries that were left. What the fuck is wrong with you? Hey, what did we do to you? As the other men automatically into defensive positions, Kale screamed in terror and anger, "Oh, you did nothing to me. Oh no. But what do you jerks do to helpless women? To helpless kids?" I continue in a monotone, "That's why I have to do this kind of shit." I dash forward and take out one of the men once more, which prompts the 4 surviving lackeys to fire multiple rounds of ammunition from their individual guns at me. Even though those bullets have no chance in hell of even causing me to grunt in pain, I give them a little more time and start spinning my blade around my body in a manner that will incinerate and deflect individual bullets to give them a few more seconds and to gain momentum. I don't really care what guns they use or what they're called. "Why you little shit, I'm going to watch you die for this." Kale shouted in rage, as he watched the bullets get easily blocked and dodged by a man walking in a straight line. "You're gonna see me? Which eyes?" He seemed caught off guard by my question, and just as he was about to answer, I swept my own legs, slid on the floor with one hand, and used my ignition stick to slash the air with the other, decapitating the 4 lackeys at his side as he barely ducked. As he fell, the fire drew blood from his sockets, gliding across his pupils, and boiling his sclerae like tomato soup. Unable to form a coherent sentence, Kale could only scream in pain, so he swung his arms around and, after getting to his feet, ran toward me in a blind rage, literally blind. His elbow and forearms would have delivered a powerful blow to a normal person, if they could actually hit the target. He finally swung his right arm down onto me, letting me catch his forearm and quickly catching his other one with no effort at all. "Well, what did you expect to see with those eyes once more?" I say this in a low, icy voice as my grip tightens around his forearms, melting through and cracking the metal cases, and starting to put pressure on his delicate forearms. All I can see with mine is a miserable pile of horse shit, who plan to sell off innocent women and children simply to satisfy the selfish needs of disgusting perverts, who have melted the balance of our society with their very presence. "Keep that filthy mouth of yours shut, and I'll make your death quick for you." I sneered at him, my face mask concealing my frown from the sight of the already blind degenerate. "GG go to hell," he opened his lips to say, but I quickly broke his wrists and headbutted his skull before he could finish. He scowled in my direction, missing the mark entirely, and roared in mindless defiance. The sound of Kale's screams filled my mind with a sick sense of satisfaction, and I glared into their blood-stained eye sockets as I ignited my ignition stick into the same indigo needle, pricking it straight through their chest and twisting and moving it in a way that allowed the pain to splash and spread throughout their body. "You little shit, you asked for this. I'll show you a new trick I've been working on just for little pricks like you," I said in the same low tone, my indigo hair flowing from my head and over my larvate face as I glared down at Kale. As I said those words, I took the blade from their chest, pierced it through their shoulder to pin them down, and started to accumulate heat into a tiny condensed ball of fire. Kale started to struggle more as the ball compressed and gained power, yelling in a fit of wrath and adrenaline, "WWHO the hell are you?" He howled in a frenzy, his desperation clear, and his dread blatant. "Who am I? My name is irrelevant. The end of the day, no name really matters. What you do with your life, not what you were known for, is what counts most. However, if you're curious about my name, then I'm referred to as Indigo Inferno on the news. The abbreviation for Indigo. Well, it would only take a second normally, but I wanted to let him feel the heat build up, the anticipation build up, and the anxiety of approaching eternal oblivion to melt his mind even further. The tiny fireball floated in front of my fist after another second of waiting. Any final remarks? I asked him mockingly, as I didn't even bother to wait for his response, but got one anyway. Fuck yo. A point-blank jet of heat engulfed his entire upper body as he yelled, burning through his paper-thin muscle tissue and frying his bones to a crispy brown. I struck the fireball. Even though I felt a wave of satisfaction and used pure heat to steam clean my dark outfit of all the blood, I was unable to bring a smile to my hidden lips as I looked around at my masterpiece and all the frail lives of the willing degenerates that had just ended due to their disgusting choices. I soon made my way to the main exit, sauntering out toward the truck from before, making sure to close the door behind me so as not to frighten any victims I might find with the gory sight. I broke through the truck's rear door and discovered a number of cages filled with women aged 5 to 32, chained to the bars, and obviously malnourished. Many of them were probably already defiled, and a startling number of them were toddlers and middle school girls, which infuriated me even more. The women all retreated in terror, clutching the kids in a protective way, demonstrating that these women were familiar and close after their common ordeal. I sighed softly as I moved carefully toward the nearest cages and rekindled my sword, slicing through the bars like freshly made bread. It's okay. Now you're all safe. Help those who are unable to walk, those of you who can. While the women reluctantly trusted me, I said slowly, I'm sorry that you all had to go through this. None of you ever have to worry about them ever again. I said, turning around and setting down a bag I had brought with me, taking out blankets for the victims. Because I am here. Izuku's perspective. Month 10's end, 1 week prior to the UA admission examinations. The early sun was blazing passionately and vigorously into my eyes as a sudden burst of dazzling light swept across my room and squeezed through the blinds covering my windows. Through the slits of my closed eyelids, the abrupt light hurt my delicate pupils and startled me out of my sound sleep. I rubbed my heavy lids, brushed through my irritating lashes that shielded my forest green irises, and dragged myself upwards. I limped down the hall, trying to make it to the kitchen, with my arms down at my sides as I raised and lowered my legs off my once vibrant bed with a sleepy groan and a deep yawn. In an effort to rouse them and remove some of my sluggish rust, my arms found themselves dangling above my head and upward, outstretched toward the ceiling. With a sulky, blank look on my face, I squatted down and opened the refrigerator to see if there was anything to eat. I saw a sealed bowl of the leftover holy pork cutlet, called katsudon in this household, and I quickly and happily grabbed it. I limped up to the kitchen table and sat down, my eyes barely able to focus on the little light splattered on the apartment's walls. I grabbed my fork, started working, and ripped the plastic wrap off the bowl's rim. My vitality was starting to return after I finished the deletable breakfast, and my exhausted appearance was gradually disappearing. I glanced at a hidden window and walked toward it, my cheekbones bare and a neutral expression decorating my freckled face. I extended my arm, took the blinds in my hands, and used a little force to pry them apart. The once empty living room was suddenly filled with an uncomfortably brilliant yet calming wave of light that even made its way back to the kitchen. The brightness reminded me of the light at the end of this incredibly long tunnel, and the warmth reassured me that I wouldn't be alone. I looked out over the peaceful streets of my neighborhood as my eyes adjusted to the sudden light, noticing a few leaves fluttering in the cold, gentle breeze. The snow has fled for the next 3 days, and the sun shines innocently on resident puddles on sidewalks, walkways, and roadways. I would be throwing everything I've learned and acquired into this one significant moment in 10 days. The entrance exam for UA. We've concluded after a month of investigation with Lelouch that the admission exam has never been the same. They would never be the same, even if certain years were comparable. Every year, the challenge only gets harder as the generations go by, and in certain families, stronger eccentricities come together to produce amazing offspring. This idea led to the rapid development of quirk marriages, which are prohibited and strongly disapproved of in quirk culture. I had a gut feeling that I would probably fail, but I would never be able to forgive myself if I didn't try. To save lives, to fulfill the aspirations and hopes of my loved ones, friends, and family. I'll have to take a chance. Izuku's perspective. One day before to the entrance exam, like each other day, I stand at one end of the mat with my eyes narrowed confidently and gazing directly at my opponent. Kazuki Collin. She ascended to a low stance and yelled at me. Remember, Izu, no holding back, alright? This fight is for both of our growths individually, and we can't let feelings get the best of us. Give me every bit of the energy you've built up over these last 10 months, and prove to me that you can be a hero. Her already stunning face was adorned with a broad, vivacious grin. I take my own defensive stance, lowering myself a little and separating my legs a little while raising my right arm to shield my face. In order to protect myself from any potential side hits, my left arm tensed up and dangled slightly to the side of my torso. I'm going to hold my arm firmly in place as a precaution, even though I knew full well that this position wouldn't be maintained for very long. I also know from experience that a kick to the ribs hurts terrible. I'll give you everything I've got, so I hope you won't hold back either, I exclaim at her, my smile as eager as it was nervous. You have given me so much through those months. To not oblige your request would be an insult to you, to Suzaku, to Lelouch and CC, and to myself. Suzaku gave neither of us a glance or a nod at the mat's edge before swiping his arm up, slicing through the air and signaling the start of our fight. In an attempt to make me wince, Colin, as usual, raced toward me like a bullet train without taking a position. I reacted by taking a step back, but I quickly changed my mind and moved forward to get momentum, pushing my palm forward in an attempt to hit her in the shoulder. I took a step back and seized her foot in both of my hands as she swiftly sidestepped, swinging her leg around to hit me in the hip with her heel. She leapt to her feet without missing a beat and swung her free leg in a clean blast at my forehead. I rolled away to get some distance after stumbling Colin with the momentum I had been provided. I managed to sidestep her as she rushed forward once more, throwing herself into the air to try a drop kick. She grunted in frustration as a result of the recoil and came running at me once more, trying to punch me like Superman, but I managed to grab her wrist, raise her arm, and bring my knee directly to her bare body, repeatedly kicking her in the ribs. She tried to break free from my hold on her wrist, but I held fast and even gave her a headbutt on the forehead after pulling her into me. She faltered, fell to one knee, and I booted her down after slamming my free elbow into her already tender forehead. I pin her down as she lies on the mat. It astonished me that beating her was so much simpler. She could usually just grab me by the waist and bodily chuck me across the room, but I suppose I adjusted to her fighting style after learning it and getting a little PTSD. As Colin tapped the mat and said that she had accepted defeat, I stood up. She had a little cut on her forehead from an earlier bruise that was visible when I glanced down at her. I gently grasped her wrist, helped her stand up, and walked her to the bench that I had been used to during the previous 10 months. I applied pressure to her gushing injury and used a tissue to wipe away the perspiration we had generated throughout our match as Suzaku hurried to get a towel. Colin avoided making eye contact with me throughout the duration of this process. Her hand started to grip my shirt as I applied pressure to her cut. Still down at the floor, she replied in a low monotone, "You did it." As I bent my head to examine her face, I saw a gleam in her eyes and said, "You actually beat me." Tears. To think that I used to be able to punt you like a football, and then you just come by and whoop my ass like nothing. Her lashes fluttered, and at last her sky-blue eyes looked toward my forest green, piercing my heart with a twinge of guilt and concern as a steady stream of warm, clear tears streamed down her cheeks. I started to say, "Colin," but was abruptly interrupted. My mom used to say that the greatest compliment to a teacher is to say, "I don't need you anymore, but I don't want to be useless. I want to be needed. To be helpful. To be by your side. And watch you grow into an incredible hero." I am sorry, I shouldn't have sigh. I found myself putting my arms around her in an embrace that even I hadn't anticipated since my eyes had filled with so much of the same warm fluid that Colin's had. As soon as we understood what we were doing, we both became silent. Our eyes were still fixed on one another, and our lips were mashed together in a soft and pleasurable way. Our eyes automatically closed without our conscious awareness, and we supported each other's heads with our arms while she supported my torso with hers. In the middle of our soothingly warm hug, our wet lips came together in a slow tango, moving both against and with each other. From her head to her back, one of my hands moves in calming circles over her ever-moving muscles. Our lips separated with a gentle pop following a few more moments of quiet osculation and comforting touches. My eyes were instantly drawn to the angelic gleam in her enormous azure irises and perfect black pupils as soon as they opened. I wiped away the still fresh tears with my fingers on her rose cheek and kept admiring her stunning features. Her lips twisted into a jittery smile as I said, "Colin, I will always need you. You being useless is a mere fantasy. I may have been able to best you, but without you, I wouldn't have gotten this far. Colin, I love you. And that is never going to change." The tears started to flow more quickly. She put her arms around my torso in an embrace that I would imagine would shatter the bones of any normal person, but I couldn't have felt more at ease at that very moment. "Oh Izuku," she said. My heart would ordinarily be pounding when I lay my head on top of hers and felt her nestle into my chest, but I felt so relaxed. Even though it was my first kiss, I hardly felt nervous because it seemed so natural. I let my arms wander till I finally caught her in the softest hug I could manage. I started to say something, but was struck in the head by a light plastic bottle. I was startled when I looked in the direction the bottle had come from and saw Suzaku laughing to himself while grinning teasingly modestly. He laughed as he remarked, "Oh, come on guys, you're reminding me of my loneliness over here." At that moment, I felt the shame finally strike me across the face, my cheeks turning crimson. With her metal water bottle in hand, Colin rushed to Suzaku out of humiliation and smacked Suzaku over the skull with it, sending a clang sound through my ears and probably Suzaku's as well. I was reminded of the day I first met them in CC when I watched them start to argue and Suzaku take his own bottle for a duel of the fates. The next 3 days and the major finale are the culmination of 10 months of practice, connection, and development. The admission examination, Lelouch's perspective. 9 and 10 days prior to the entrance exam I glanced at the door after hearing the bell jingle, quickly noticing the presence of my replacement. I nodded, and he walked up with a modest waltz, a beaming smile on his face. He questioned with the same joyful gleam in his eye that he gets whenever he sees a professional hero at work. "You said yesterday that we would be doing something different today, right? What's it gonna be, Lelouch?" I grinned as I said, "Well, if you follow me, then you will figure it out soon enough. Come on kid, let's get going." I was eager to see how he would respond to my small surprise. He nodded eagerly, and I approached him before we both left my store. Hold on." A specific witch's high-pitched voice could be heard behind us as she rushed toward us while carrying 2 small pouches. She handed us both a warm package of what I believed to be biscuits and said, evidently embarrassed, "Here. Why, you might get hungry out there, why you know." Izuku had failed to notice, but I was well aware that CC was attempting to be the child's hidden mother, and I thought it was hilarious to watch her self-control so severely during the last few months. After thanking her for the pouch, I put my hand on her shoulder and hurriedly murmured in her ear, "Mom of the Year awards are coming soon, did you hear?" Every inch of her hellishly angelic face turned blazing red at that moment, and she pushed me away from her in a blind fury. I started laughing uncontrollably as she whirled on her heel and fled with her tail between her knees. Izuku stood passively, apparently not understanding anything. I yelled at him, "Oh come on, how are you this dense?" I thought black holes were in space. And all he did was tilt his head again in bewilderment. He is as dense as the center of the planet, despite his genius. Never mind, we have more serious matters to attend to. Come along now." We came onto a clearing amid the foliage after about 30 minutes of strolling along the pavement and along a woodland path. I stopped in my tracks and persuaded Izuku to turn around, even though he tried to continue walking. With a little scowl to counterbalance his seeming anxiety, he questioned, "Lelouch? What's up, why aren't you walking?" In the distance, I could hear a faint rumbling that was becoming closer every second. Izuku quickly became aware of the similar sound in his ears and started looking for the source of the loud sounds. With every second that went by, the sound of the quickly rolling tires shrieking and squealing against the rocks and dirt covering the forest floor only became more intense. With a sunken tone, I responded, "You don't need to worry Izuku, I'm fine." As a smile spread across my angular, pale face. As I finish my speech, an automaton that is as tall as the trees emerges from the brush. It has a red coat of paint and, given how classic it is, some rust. No need to worry about this either. This is the surprise. His journey will now include a significant portion of my life as Zero. 2 other metallic marvels from Britannia's past, one with a sleek violet paint job and the other with a cumbersome blue design with red accents, glide across the ground in a systematic manner. The Glasgow, the Sutherland, and the Gloucester are examples of the Nightmare Frame's elegant weapons from a far more civilized era. Izuku immediately jumped back as he saw them arrive. He didn't recognize the amazing machines at first, but he soon realized they were from the history books we had read to get him ready for life as Zero. When he looked nervously at me after realizing what he was up against, I was beaming from ear to ear. As I'm sure you have recognized, the marvels you see before you are the very weapons that I used to do battle in, outwitting, and being outwitted by Britannia. These are a select few that me and CC were able to save in the world of C, so as a final contingency while you finish your training with Colin, you will learn how to hotwire, pilot, and defeat the most common forms of nightmare frames, just in case of a possible resurface or emergency. His forehead was covered in beads of sweat. He hesitantly replied to my thoughts. Izuku said in a very quiet voice, "All right then. But who's piloting them?" Which made my smile slightly softer. As the Nightmare's cockpits all opened, I hastily responded, "I'm pretty sure you know them well enough." The Sutherland-held CC, and Colin, the original pilot, stepped out of the Glasgow. And Suzaku, the former Knight of Zero himself, was in the Gloucester. Izuku inhaled deeply and started to move ahead with a little more energy, which made me laugh a little. Even though he has even more talent than I have ever had and a lot more support than I did back then, he still fears failing. It would be an understatement to say that I am positive he will succeed. Izuku's perspective: the admission exam is 6 hours away. Over the past 10 months, I've grown accustomed to walking down this sidewalk on a daily basis. It kind of depresses me to think that once the admission exam is completed, I might not have to do this as frequently. I was walking through Musutafu as usual when I noticed my favorite convenience store, which made me smile broadly. I stop in front of the door, push it open, and the bell rings like it always does. In a matter of seconds, CC came up behind her, her face expressionless, her cheeks a light shade of pink. She tilted her head and questioned, "What are you doing here? Isn't the entrance exam today?" Her gold eyes gleamed with interest. She nodded a few times as I said, "Well, I have 6 hours until then, so I just wanted to see everyone one more time, before I am put to the test." This indicated that she understood what I was saying. "Well, Lelouch and the others are currently in the back, if you want me to go get them." CC, her pale cheeks were accented by a slight reddish tinge as she answered in a monotone. With a broad smile on my face, I said, "That would be great, thank you very much," and CC smiled slightly in return. As she walks to the rear, I watched Colin, Suzaku, and Lelouch leave the rear room 45 seconds later. As Colin nudged him in the ribs, Suzaku smiled teasingly and said, "Hey Izuku. Came to see your mentor off one more time?" I quickly matched his vigor and said, "One more time? I'll be coming back whenever I get the chance, Suzaku, don't get it twisted." Lelouch's purple eyes pierced me as he inquired in a somewhat harsh tone, "How long do you have until you have to go to the exam?" "About 6 hours, so I thought I should say my goodbyes. This is going to be the culmination of all of my effort over the past 10 months, so I just wanted to see you guys one more time before all goes to shit." Because to say I am worried would be an understatement. I sighed and laughed with equal enthusiasm. I was scratching my head when I felt a pair of arms, belonging to a specific lime-haired witch, circle my waist in a reassuring embrace. "It's okay to be afraid, Izuku. Even the greatest of the great fighters get worried before a climactic showdown like this. Nobody is exempt of fear. Just know that even if you fall, even if you fail, even if you lose, you will always have a place here." This tone was so different from the typically dispassionate CC that I hardly recognized it. He was completely taken aback by her abrupt change. Even though I was perplexed, I couldn't help but smile, and my surprise only grew when I felt Colin's arms encirculate me. Lelouch and Suzaku remained aside, nodding that they expressed the same sentiment. At last, I regained my courage and gave the two women a hug in return, kissing Colin's face and saying, "Thank you," into their ears. As they say, it's better to be early than it is to be late, so Izuku, you'd better start moving quickly. Even if you have a few hours, I don't advise doing any lollygagging. In a kind but straightforward way, Lelouch said, "I suggest you take it to heart." I reluctantly pulled the two women out of my arms, stepped back, and bowed to the gathering of individuals who had transformed my life. With a victorious, "All right then. Wish me luck, guys," I swivel on my heel and start to exit the convenience store. The sound of nearly all of them shouting, "Good luck, Izuku," from behind me just makes me happier. Lelouch gives me a little, "You've got this," from the back, which just makes me more determined and serves as a reminder of how far I have gone. All I have to do now is apply their lessons for this one time and start down the path of being a hero or becoming who I was destined to be. The entrance exam is about to begin. Izuku's perspective. The admission exam is 1 hour away. I was so excited that I virtually bounced on my feet as I walked down the paved sidewalk into the front door of the UA exam hall, standing at the gates of the school that I had admired for the previous 11 years of my life. I eventually made my way to the hall's pretty huge entrance and ploddingly pushed it open. As I entered, I saw that about a dozen of the other potential candidates were already gathered around me. They had all arrived rather earlier than was required. A tall boy with blue hair, dressed far too professionally for an entrance exam, and a boy with candy cane hair and a big burned scar on his left eye were among the few individuals who stuck out in the crowd. Out of the 12, 8 of them, including the one with the scar, split off in the direction of another door, which I believed to be the chamber for the recommendation examination. I waited aimlessly for a few minutes, waiting for others to show up. I took my headphones out of my forest green sweatshirt pocket and plugged them into my phone to listen to music because I was bored. It would be untrue to suggest that my taste in music is typical, but nothing in this world is typical, so I'm not particularly embarrassed. I made the decision to sit in one of the many chairs arranged in the spacious room, periodically turning to look at the empty podium in front of me. I was unconsciously bouncing my head to the tune, relishing the nostalgic experience of Pokemon Black, and totally oblivious to the tense situation I was about to face. A knock on my shoulder distracted me from my music as I was still grooving in my chair, but I didn't switch it off. The tall, stylish guy from before was peering down at me as I looked over my shoulder. "What do you think you're doing?" he questioned sharply, his blue eyes penetrating my soul. I tilt my head and ask, sitting and listening to music? Is that a crime? I'm confused as to why he seemed so annoyed. Haven't you any shame? Acting so casually, sitting around in such casual wear as if you own this establishment? If you don't plan on taking this exam seriously, then I suggest that you pick yourself up and leave effective immediately. After the first half of the boy's tirade, I found it rather dull, so I turned up the volume and switched back to my song, nodding absently as he told me. My headphones were pulled out of my ears by him as if he was waiting for an unanswerable reaction. As more students slowly started to stream into the building, he angrily yelled at me, "Are you even listening to me, you cretin?" I reached out and silently asked for my headphones, saying without malice, "Not really, no. Did your rambling include anything other than just harsh words, and needless requests for me to quit? If not, then I think ignoring you was the right call. It is clear to me that you have no chance at success with the carelessness of your actions. I am simply suggesting that you quit causing a disturbance, and go back to whence you do me, and everyone here a favor, and shut the fuck up." I snapped during his sentence and cut short his conversation. I am just trying to relax for the bit of time that we have until all goes to shit. So why don't you take your own advice, and quit making a disturbance? We are trying to prepare for the biggest test of our lives, so let us have peace of mind. As he reluctantly gave me my earbuds, a tick appeared on his forehead. A few seats below me, he turned around and waltzed toward an empty seat. The room eventually filled up, and a number of cool-looking eccentricities were already on display, such as the guy with the face mask and 6 arms or the female with the brilliant pink skin and hair. Finally, just 2 minutes before the written exam portion was scheduled to begin, the 2 people I had known would be there from the beginning entered the room, their arrogant smiles shining brightly like a flashlight in a pitch-black room. Izumi Yagi, my cherished younger sister, and Katsuki Bakugo, my fiercest opponent. Not wishing to repeat my annoying life, I clicked my tongue and turned back to face the front of the room. Even though the room was filled with the sound of footfall on a hard floor, I could still hear Accumula Town's calming melody. As students started to take their seats, I continued to breathe slowly and steadily. A girl with long green hair and big eyes sat to my left, and a boy with medium jet black hair sat to my right. When the spotlights at the front of the room finally came on and shone, I knew it was time to switch off the music. Taking a deep breath and getting ready to shout, a man with short, spiked blonde hair, clothed entirely in black, and sporting tacky glasses stepped out flamboyantly onto the stage. He then hurried to the platform. With his palm to his ear in a seductive stance, the man proudly said, "What's up, UA candidates? Thanks for tuning in to me, your school DJ. Come on, let me hear ya." But received no response from the anxious audience. Huh. Tough crowd. Well, that's alright. Let's start up those written exams, alright. At that point, desks with reasonably sized books for us to fill out sprang up from the floor in front of our chairs. Mike flashed his trademark toothy grin and gestured flamboyantly at the audience, saying, "You can get started whenever you want, but you've only got an hour and a half to finish up, so don't ponder on the small stuff." I started writing down my thoughts at that point. I could see individuals clearly struggling as I looked across the room, including a brunette with a small bob cut and the pink-skinned girl from before. Lelouch v. Britannia taught me everything he knew, which is presumably why I was having little to no trouble on my exam. Even though that man was a slacker in school, his lectures are brutal. After 26 minutes, I had completed my exam, and 32 minutes later, I went over my responses. I got up slowly, which was much easier than it would have been because the kid with the jet black hair next to me finished before me and left already. Mike's startled reaction as I passed my test so quickly caught my attention as I made my way to the front of the room. Well, we've got ourselves an F-fast bunch of candidates this year, huh? I started to walk after he quickly directed me to the practical exam room. There were 2 changing rooms when I got there, one for men and one for women, and I naturally went into the men's one. I was surprised to see that the black-haired guy from earlier was gone when I walked in. Why wasn't he here? He finished it sooner than I did. Did he submit an application for general studies? Now that I think about it, how on earth did he beat me? Izuku's perspective, after changing their phys. Ed. uniforms, all of the applicants who were staying for the practical exam were divided into various groups and sent to a specific training facility. While some people were stretching and mingling outside, the most just remained there passively, anticipating the impending storm. Clearly excited for the entrance exam, the girl with the pink skin was jumping up and down quickly. In contrast, the brunette's breathing was abnormally rapid and she was trembling with anxiety. I turned her around and gazed into her chocolate brown eyes as I rushed over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. I put both of my hands on her shoulders in a comforting manner because her pupils were small and it was obvious that she was about to have a panic attack. "Okay, I know you don't know me, but just listen, alright?" I said. "Alright, I need you to follow my lead, okay? Now, put one of your fingers on the side of your nose, and press it to close a nostril. Then, take a deep breath with your only open nostril for 3 seconds, and breath out through your mouth for another 3 seconds. Just repeat that process, alright?" The little girl frantically nodded and started doing the instructions I gave her. The longer she did it, the slower her body became and the more the shaking stopped. At last, she had become sufficiently calm to be able to talk. With a faint smile on her lips and flushed cheeks, she said tentatively, Thanks for the help there. I've been really nervous for this, you know?" Her blush seemed to brighten a little as I said, "Oh, trust me, I know all too well. I've been preparing for 10 months, and I'm still terrified." She glanced at the ground with sadness and exclaimed, 10 months? Geez, you sure put in a lot more effort into your training than me." She winced at my response, but as I continued, she developed a fairly agreeable smile. "Hey, it doesn't matter how much one has trained compared to another. I'm sure you'll be fine." The straightforward inquiry, "My name is Izuku Midoriya. What's yours?" prompted her to resume her speech. "Ochako Uraraka, it's really nice to meet you." Ochako was in the middle of saying, "Greetings little listeners. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the second round of your entrance exams," when Mike abruptly interrupted. "Now, I bet you're all wondering what you will be doing for the practical portion. To put it simply, you're going to be fighting robots of varying difficulties. The higher difficulty level it is, the more points you will earn. There are 3 main types of robots, the 1-pointer, the 2-pointer, and the 3-pointer. There are also 3 10-pointers spread across the map, that you may recognize from the history books if you've studied hard enough. Of course, you can't forget the surprise for the last 5 minutes of the exam. It's a special tool that will help us later." Mike went on, and the audience was attentive to the explanation. "All right, then, I hope you all have a great day." The big doors of the building opened, and I hurried in without thinking. I heard present Mike shouting that there were no countdowns for a true hero while everyone else remained. In the end, I discovered a variety of droids, primarily 1-pointers. I picked up a very jagged stone and slid under one of the 2-pointers. I stopped sliding, slashed the cables underneath, leapt back on top of the droid, stomped it down, and then used the momentum to leap up and over to another one pointing. In a similar manner, the other members of the group fell, frantically firing their pellets around the model street. I scored 11 points at the conclusion of that enjoyable round. Everywhere I looked as I hurried through the streets, I saw broken objects and injured kids sleeping. My heart was pounding, and I could hear shouts and crashes for miles. I finally located the source of the loud noises after sprinting for about 30 seconds. With its wheels on its feet, a pretty enormous automatonic droid glided across the road. I never in a million years imagined that the things I had learned from Lelouch's final lectures would be useful, but fortunately, I would be confronted by the mechanical marvel that is a Gloucester nightmare frame. Specifically, a model based on Gloucester by the late Cornelia Lee Britannia. It appears that I may actually have a chance to win. Izuku's perspective. About 21 pupils were gathered around me, all of them battling a swarm of 1 to 3-pointers in a last-ditch effort to obtain points and leeway. The Cornelia model Gloucester, which had been charging about with its golden-headed spear slicing through the empty model buildings like butter, was the greater menace, but they chose to ignore it as the conflict continued. I had observed that the Gloucester was being piloted by AI programming rather than by human pilots. The motions were far from flawless and disrespectful to the woman who was the first to pilot such a nightmare. Although AI piloted and controlled every other droid, each model differed significantly. The 1 to 3-pointers were able to recognize and attack the learner in front of them thanks to devices that functioned similarly to eyes. As I started to examine the various droids more closely, I became aware of an important aspect of the empty Gloster. Because it still had its cockpit, it could be piloted and hotwired. Recalling the specifics of the first, second, and third pointers, I readied myself to utilize the abilities I had been bestowed. Even Lelouch hasn't attempted this, so it may be quite risky, but that was part of the joy. All of this is really a leap of faith, Mina's perspective. The boy with the viridian hair who had been speaking to Ochako earlier simply threw himself out there as the doors opened, without even waiting to be instructed to do so. Present Mike suddenly exclaimed, "What the hell are all of you still doing here? There are no countdowns in real hero work, so hopped it already?" As everyone began to flee. Putting my bewilderment aside, I simply followed the mob and eventually broke away to melt my own robots. I discovered a tiny group of 5 2-pointers and 2 3-pointers, and I simply covered them with an acid blanket to put them to sleep in a matter of seconds. I got 17 points for taking out so many robots. Hold on, was it 15? 16? I have absolutely no math skills. Whatever you just read is irrelevant. It never happened. Anyway, I continued running through the fictitious city while dousing 3 1-pointers with acid. Ochako had maybe 10 of them in the air when I shortly ran into him. All of them fell with a loud kaboom when she tapped her fingers together. I exclaimed, "Wow! How many points was that?" As I was astounded by her increased strength following our training sessions with Sue and me. When I realized how close my estimation was, my head hung down. 22 I think. 5 2-pointers, and 4 3-pointers. I'm at 19 points right now, so we are pretty close, I exclaimed, grinning broadly and gleefully closing my eyes. She started to say, "We should keep going though, we still need Mo," but before she could finish, we heard a tremendous crash and the sound of tires rolling down the road. We noticed a huge, violet-plated robot with a golden-headed spear in its hands as we gazed up. The deafening smash came from that object slashing down a structure. It had a purple crown on its head and what appeared to be a rifle at its hip. Unaware of what it was, I spun around and started to flee as quickly as I could, accelerating by skating on my acid. Ochako yelled at me, "I think we should split up, Mina. We need our own robots." I grudgingly accepted her argument and moved away from her. I managed to meld 2 3-pointers and 4 2-pointers while skating about, reaching a score total that let me pass. I continued skating around, melting a few more of them in the process, just to be sure I would be alright. However, as the crashes continued and the cries of the people and tires on the pavement became more audible, I started skating in the direction of the noise to find out what was happening. The tall boy with jets on his legs and the green-haired child from the beginning stood in the middle of a couple dozen 2 and 3-pointers, while the purple robot from earlier was at the absolute end of the street. There were additional purple heads sporadically emerging from the rooftops, and I could hear even louder cries in the distance, so I knew this wasn't the only one. The tall child turned heel and started running in the other direction, delivering a 2-pointer a jumping spin kick while saying to himself, "Well, I don't think this is even close to winnable." The man with the forest hair remained motionless, letting the robots approach him, although he didn't appear particularly frightened. I got my acid ready to try to help him, but he started laughing before I could do anything. He giggled joyously, and I watched in anticipation until he finally stopped. As he started talking, he carefully raised his hand to his eye and removed something. "Izuku Midoriya commands you, all of you. Self-destruct immediately." When he flamboyantly flew the hand he was using to cover his eye to the side, I initially believed he was kidding, but I was shocked to hear explosions. One by one, the robots started to destroy themselves as they looked around. The child went toward a 2-pointer that was going to explode and grabbed a discarded manhole lid before I could say anything. I started to say, wait, what are you?" But he had already sprung up and over the 2-pointer, holding the metal lid under his feet as the robot burst. I was surprised at how quickly the youngster shot through the air, but he remained unharmed. It was both amazing and humorous to hear the man's crying out triumphantly fade away as he flew through the air. Before I knew it, I knew where he was going to land, and I yelled in horror as my heart skipped a beat. He was flying directly in the direction of the purple robot. Izuku's perspective. In utter amazement that the sensors on the bots indeed functioned similarly to eyeballs, I clung desperately to the sewer lid as I flew through the air. Even though I had never used my Gios before, I now knew what CC and Lelouch intended to convey, that this power is truly addictive in their incessant lectures and tirades. However, my main concerns are how I'm going to land and what I'll do once I'm on the ground. Even though the Gloster's peripherals updated each time it looked in a different direction, the AI failed to detect the approaching projectile. After just a few seconds, I finally pushed off of the quickly moving disc and skidded over the Nightmare's armor plating, almost flying off and landing on the ground. As I approached the cockpit, I used a stone I had picked up before running to the two-pointer and tried a trick Suzaku and Colin had taught me about opening a nightmare cockpit without a key. Eventually, I saw the cockpit open, letting me in as the nightmare kept moving freely. I immediately started working on hot wiring and modifying the Gloster after jumping into the cockpit. I discovered that the modifications were very little and straightforward with each wire and instruction. The female with the pink skin was standing motionless, staring at the Gloster through its eye while I changed the programming. From her point of view, that must have been incredibly strange to witness. About a minute later, the Gloster came to a complete halt and remained still in the center of the road. I finally reactivated the Gloster by flicking the trigger and pressing a button, and I peered through the automaton's lone eye. I started to navigate the big violet Gloster down the fictitious city streets while holding the trigger and in the piloting position for a KMF. I took my time so as not to crush anyone. The girl stared at the now closed cockpit in complete amazement as she merely moved aside to allow me go. I decided to bike around to check if anyone needed help because I had already accumulated enough points. I just stabbed a dozen of them with the anti-KMF lance, leaving big cuts and marks on the street, because a spiky red-headed boy was just full of them and hitting them like they were normal villains. He was gradually becoming overpowered. The child believed me to be an adversary and was understandably frightened by my unexpected appearance. Without saying a word, I opened the cockpit, waved to the child, closed it again, and drove away to find other people. I stopped to say hello when I met Ochako again while driving. After a long moment of astonished quiet during which she waited for the behemoth that had arrived from the opposite side of the city to attack, I emerged from the cockpit and smiled casually at her. She raised her hand gently and started waving extremely slowly, I mean very, very slowly. Our brief social interlude was cut short when I heard gunshots, most likely from the two other 10-pointers on the map, and immediately returned to the cockpit. I was reminded of the KMF movement style that Suzaku, Lelouch, and Colin had helped me build as I glided down the street and gradually settled into the new Nightmare's mechanics. Across the block it occupied, I quickly discovered another Gloster idly firing its cannon. The 10-pointer, who saw me as an ally because I am in a nightmare, still didn't appear to care that I was thundering down the street. I could just approach and spear the lance directly into the KMF's cockpit, causing it to explode, because I was safe from any potential danger. I was comparatively unharmed and had ensured that no one would be caught in the blast. Now that the number of robots has substantially decreased, I stand idly, confident that everything will be well. However, I erred in that fleeting moment of relaxation. Present Mike suggested a surprise, but I forgot about it. Only 5 minutes left, candidates, you know what that means. It's time for your surprise, he said, and as he did, a new shadow hovered over me, even in my Gloster, and a tremendously loud rumble echoed through the fictitious city. Mike shouted into the microphone again from a distance, "Say hello to the zero-pointer." As the alleged zero-pointer started to move. Izuku's perspective. I knew I would probably lose, but I really wanted to give it a shot against the enormous beast of pure metal. Lelouch taught me a lot of techniques for winning, but he always reminded me that I should make a tactical retreat if the likelihood of losing is as high as it is right now. However, I heard a cry as I began to slide away from the behemoth. It was a voice I knew rather well. The tall lad from before the written exam was among the students who fled in terror when my peripheral vision refreshed my view of the ground, but what I saw shortly after caused my pupils to shrivel to the size of periods on paper. I just had that beautiful waving session with Ochako, who was immobilized after being pinned beneath a concrete slab from a collapsed building. In an attempt to locate her, the girl with the pink skin was frantically running around and crying out to her. With a quick thought, I reached down and volunteered to help her go to where her companion was. She hopped onto my Cornelia frame's quite large palm, knowing I was in the cockpit, and let me bring her to where Ochako lay, nearly unconscious. The sexy pink girl leapt out of my grasp and sprinted to her side as quickly as she could, starting to make what I could only imagine was acid. Hey, Ochako. Are you okay? Ochako could hardly move, so it was hard to respond when he spoke. She started to say something, but she was too exhausted and coughed hard, a little saliva mingling with the vomit beside her. After kneeling the Gloster on its knee, I leapt out of the cockpit and jumped down beside them. Get her to safety after you've freed her. I'll deal with this Registeel sequel that nobody asked for, I said, leaping back up the Nightmare's limbs, hopping into the cockpit, and speeding off toward the towering monstrosity that is the zero-pointer before anyone could challenge my terrible joke. I jumped on top of the buildings and rode across the rooftops using the Gloster's improved knee joints. I took the rifle off my hip and started shooting at the exposed joints and wires of the mechanical wonder. I continued to move in, throwing my blaster to the side and snatching my lance in its hole. In contrast to the Gloucester I had previously fought, the zero-pointer actually brought its arm back to attack me after noticing me. I leapt onto its arm as it punched, rode up to its shoulder, and swiftly stabbed the lance into its exposed circuitry. I repeatedly stabbed into the zero-pointer, causing it to bring its opposing arm toward me in an attempt to stop me, sending sparks and cables flying in the process. I started to pry it open with the lance stuck in its neck, gradually and methodically ripping its head from its body. The zero-pointer had stopped going forward to focus on me, and the attempt to stop me was a bit clumsy. Once it was sufficiently open, I plunged my lance directly into the machine's internal wiring and technology, which completely stopped it from moving. I made my wager after confirming that Ochako and her friend had escaped and that no one was in close proximity. I sprang off the shoulder of the zero-pointer with a powerful push from the legs of the mech I was piloting, the push starting to knock the giant droid to the ground. I couldn't help but chuckle as I plummeted, even though I was frightened of what may occur if even one thing went wrong. Even though I was utterly afraid, I thought this whole thing was hilarious and was laughing uncontrollably. Even though I was concerned that my plan would not work out, I had never in my life felt so excited or exhilarated. After all, that's what these kinds of bets are for. It is merely an act of faith. Izuku's perspective. I slowed my breathing to calm myself after my nightmare's feet hit the ground a few moments later. As the zero-pointer crashed down behind me, the shockwave hardly displacing the Gloucester an inch, my laughter had turned into a little giggle. I set my lance down, let the cape blow in the wind, and gazed in wonder at my work of art as the explosion engulfed the field in a wave of flames. I triumphantly popped open the cockpit, got to my feet, and took another look at my work before finally starting to cheer and laugh at what I had done. From a distance, a group of kids gathered, gaping at me in disbelief and stunned bewilderment. With pride, I yelled, "Yeah, ahaha! Suck on that, you Registeel knockoff!" I then burst out laughing again, but this time it was much less crazy and more like it was coming from energy and enthusiasm. As soon as I heard the bell signifying the test was over, I leapt from the cockpit into the ground below, cleaned myself up, and started to approach the gathering while grinning broadly and laughing giddily. As I passed by, the other candidates, some in amazement, others in terror, all with respect, moved aside for whatever reason. I identified the recovery girl as a short, elderly woman who was healing the wounds of the students while kissing people on the cheek. I noticed Ochako sitting on the sidewalk with her pink friend, giving each other hugs. The pink-skinned girl gave me a small wave since Ochako was too exhausted from using the quirk excessively and from using all of her energy to cure her wounds from Recovery Girl. I gave him a little wave in return and hurried back to my leave. I go back to the changing room by myself, get back into my old clothes, put on my green hoodie, and quickly get warmed up. I walked casually past the now returning candidates as I waltzed out of the changing area. I saw the tall boy staring at me with a look that I couldn't quite place but knew was filled with shock. I walked out with my head held high after pulling open the door as I arrived at the facility's exit. In my entire life, I had never felt more content or proud. I am eager to inform Lelouch, Nezu's point of view. Shortly following the admission exam normally, I would watch passively as the students were dismantled in front of my eyes, but after witnessing a student defeat, Hotwire, and pilot that damn nightmare on a nearly professional level in a matter of minutes, as well as defeat the zero-pointer all by himself, I couldn't help but laugh aloud, much like Cornelia has done when facing significant threats on her own. I was astonished by this boy with Viridian hair today, and it appeared as though the same message had reached the exhausted insomniac who was standing next to me, as his eyes opened fully for the first time in a long time. "Who the hell is that kid?" Aizawa questioned, blinking quickly as though he was trying to verify whether or not what we had witnessed was true. Present Mike, who appeared to be contemplating the mastery of what had transpired, explained slowly, says here that he is Izuku Midoriya, 15 years old. It's surprising that Eraserhead was thus shocked, but what worried me was All Might's reaction, which was a mix of disbelief, regret, and terror. Putting my feelings aside, Mike and I started going through his files. Mike seemed to have lost some of the life in his eyes, and what we soon discovered had my heart pounding with excitement and my mind racing. In addition to his lack of eccentricities, he was naturally intelligent and skilled. He wasn't born this way. Practice made him that way, and it demonstrated the kind of hero he could be if given the opportunity. His traits are reminiscent of Zero the Rebel, the late Black Rebellion leader and miracle worker. Expecting everyone to be thrilled about the opportunity to have this student, I exclaimed with excitement, "The boy is quirkless." That's incredible. Everything we just saw him do was raw talent and prowess. Even in the midst of overwhelming threats, he formulated a surefire plan at success, took the risks he needed to take, and saved people while destroying several 1 to 3 pointers in the process. To put it briefly, the boy is a genius among geniuses. However, I only saw 2 people nodding in agreement. I would say that he should focus on training for the police or Marines with that kind of talent. Vlad King gave a stern scowl, as if he didn't like the idea of bringing him along. It is true that he is extremely talented, and has the heart of a hero indeed, but he is still quirkless. A bullet, a blade, a quirk, anything could defeat him in practically one use. I continued gravely, attempting to persuade the others to act rationally. But you saw what he can do without a quirk. If we were to give him the materials and the resources necessary, then we could see him becoming the next miracle maker, I said. I can see that. The kid hotwired something that Powerloader coded within less than 3 minutes, and piloted it as if he had owned it for the past decade. That Midoriya kid is something else, Midnight said with a broad end. She had a less than perfect smile on her face. With a downcast attitude that made it obvious he was nervous, Mike responded, no matter how much I am sure he could whoop ass out there, Vlad is right. 1 bullet, and he's down. I responded less angrily than Vlad since his arguments made sense. Eraserhead fights in nothing but a black tracksuit and a scarf, and has he died? We are all vulnerable to bullets, are we not? Vlad's pretty wide mouth expanded again before Mike could reply. Knowing that he wouldn't be giving up anytime soon, I nodded sadly. Then let's put it to a vote to see if we'll bring in a quirkless kid, and waste a seat in a classroom of elites. In addition to maintaining order in the classroom, as a principal, I also need to maintain order among my acquaintances and trusted personnel. As everyone else stayed submissive, Eraserhead, Midnight, Mike, and I raised our hands in agreement with the statement, all right, all in favor of bringing Izuku into UA's hero course, raise your hands. With a deadpan expression and a stare into his black eyes, Eraserhead said, I wouldn't have expected you of all people to turn him down, All Might. Aren't you the one who always says that anybody can be a hero? All Might looked down at the floor and said in a dampened tone, I'm sorry, but a quirkless boy would be far too vulnerable, and would most likely get in the way. I want to say yes, but I just can't. Ectoplasm, Vlad King, Hound Dog, Cementos, and even All Might raised their hands in reaction to the statement, all in favor of not bringing Izuku Midoriya onto the hero course, raise your hand. I glanced down in defeat, thinking I would never be able to talk to that boy. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw that Powerloader was just gazing at the freshly programmed Gloucester and hadn't lifted his hand for either. Vlad looked over, forgetting he was there, and his pupils contracted. Powerloader, what do you think? He asked. Oh, I need to speak with him. I need to know how the hell he piloted like that. We need to bring him on. Vlad looked furious when he realized we were tied. Glaring down at me, he replied coldly, it seems we are at an impasse. I eventually found a middle ground. How about this, we don't bring him on, yet. In the first-year classes, if anybody falls out of line in a way that I deem unbefitting of a hero within a month after the first day, then they will be sent to general studies, and replaced with Midoriya. Do we have a deal? He nodded his head, as did all those who had joined him, with a tongue click. It appears that I will be focusing considerably more on the first-year students this year than I have in the past. I just hope that if he is truly denied this opportunity, the result won't break him. However, I feel confident about this one, and if I'm not mistaken, it's to follow my instincts. I was able to escape and turn into who I am because of that. Point of view. Just prior to the entrance exam, I was standing in front of the gates of the high school that, while it was my childhood goal, was now only a means to an end. It was difficult not to chuckle at the several folks chattering and boasting around me as though they were going to ace the test by themselves. However, I persisted and pushed open the exam building's door, observing that some students had already been seated while others were standing around mingling. I wished I had brought my earphones so I could at least unwind as I strolled over to a wall and laid my back against it out of boredom. When this youngster, who was a little taller than me, began berating a kid with forest green hair for listening to music, I'm happy to report that the green kid quickly and precisely fired back. Now that I think about it, perhaps it was a good thing not to bring music. I was standing silently against the wall when a girl with short violet hair leaned against the wall next to me and took out her phone and earbuds right away. I chose to warn the tall child who was still there in the room. Hey, just so you know, if that guy over there catches you listening to music, he is going to scream like a banshee. She gave a small laugh at my deadpan comment and inserted her earphones, which I only now discovered had earphone jacks hanging from the lobes, into her ears. She responds to my comment with a mischievous smirk. Well, if he does, then I can just say that it's part of my quirk. I sneer at her response, lie back against the wall, and briefly close my eyes. Looking back at the girl, I can see that she had chosen a song from Spotify. It was a tune I knew all too well. She was surprised by my abrupt inquiry, but she nodded rapidly. Isn't that Flo? She asked. Yeah, you listen to them. I nod in agreement, remembering the first time I heard the brilliant music that made my childhood so bright. I closed my eyes for a moment before turning to face the girl again, who had a totally different demeanor. I'm just gonna say, colors smacks. There is nothing else that needs to be said. A broad, dazzling, and fervent smile. She stopped talking, slapped her hand over her mouth, and turned away, her cheeks flushed brightly. I know, right? There is so much, yet so little going on in your ears, and the vocals are just on point. The riffs in the middle simply melt my eardrums in the best way. And of course, we can't forget that first loud and proud line. Ooh. God, I wish I could listen to it for the first time all over again, she said. With a slight nod, she continued to look away from me. Well, I am assuming you are into music, huh? I said solemnly, taking a quick look at the floor. Hey, nothing to be ashamed of. You're allowed to like whatever the hell you want. I'm just glad that you still have something that resembles passion. As I remained silently, she eventually turned to face me again, her blush decreasing with every second. I was careful not to say anything inappropriate since I know how lonely it can be. None of the people at my school listened to Flo, so I guess I just got carried away. She smirked as she said, well, I'm not from your school, so there's that. She chuckled a little at the comment. With a cunning head twist, she added, touché, touché, you are new. Her jacks were moving in sync in the air, indicating that she was feeling fine. I'm going to be attempting to get into the hero course. Wish me luck, because I don't really know what the hell my quirk is good for in combat. My smile faded a little, but I forced myself to ignore my prejudice since I didn't want to despise a wonderful person. She tilted her head again, this time in bewilderment, and nodded slightly in response to my question. The jacks themselves are sharp enough. Can you pass sound through them? Good. Then just use sound to overload, and break down enemies. Simple as that. Her pupils contracted, and she placed a, I'm thinking, hand on her chin, her head twitching from the various ideas that suddenly flooded her mind. As gently as possible, she shouted, Jesus Christ, how the hell did I not think of that? Thanks a lot for the assist. While avoiding the harsh child who was shouting at Greenie. A half-truth, half-lie. Thanks, my mom is an ex-pro hero, so I guess I was born with a knack for quirks. Not expecting her to be intrigued, I stood there and asked, really? Well, who is she? I gazed down at the floor and inhaled deeply. You wouldn't know her, she was only famous near the end of her career, and even then, she isn't talked about much anymore. A half-truth and a half-deception. I took another long breath and exhaled in frustration with a hint of jealousy. Well, why go to general studies if your mom was a hero? I asked myself. Some would consider that to be a lie. If I learned anything from my mother and her career, it's that heroics isn't for me. However, it's the whole truth. She started to say, well, I can respect that, I guess. Then the stage came to life as a blond man wearing tacky spectacles approached the platform while preparing a piece of paper that probably had a speech written on it. We both nodded our heads and moved in the direction of the seats. The grill was on my right, and I took a seat next to the kid with the viridian hair on his right. Hey, what's your name? I wasn't prepared to answer that question at first, but something about her and something inside of me told me that I could trust her to a certain degree. I couldn't force myself to look at her while I called her name, so I glanced straight ahead without making eye contact. Tsutsumi. Percival Tsutsumi. Her caution was unexpectedly thoughtful, so I give in. Do I just call you Percival then? Or is Tsutsumi okay? She said. After giving it some thought, the girl finally spared me a smile and said, Percival is fine. And you are? As the final few kids entered the auditorium, she whispered to me, Kyoka Jiro. You can just call me Kyoka. There were two faces in the mix that were so arrogant that I could throw up right there, and there were others who seemed scared and assured. When the blonde man in front of us started talking, we both turned to face the podium and ended our chats. Following his tirade, tables appeared on the floor, and a fairly cliched test booklet with the UA logo at the top was placed on top of them. I took out my pencil and started writing with a tongue click. The test was easy throughout, therefore it was puzzling that so many individuals thought it was difficult. I got up from my seat with my finished test in hand after what seemed like only 30 minutes. I moved to the front of the room, handed the person I thought was present mic from his earlier speech, and turned to go, whispering to Kyoka one more, good luck on the practical. I spotted the child with the viridian hair again as I ascended the stairs to the exit, but he was getting ready to pass his own test. After I pulled the doors open, I headed toward the gates and out into the same paved walkway. After such a test, most people would be exhaling with relief, but I had just one thought. Finding others with my level of intelligence surprised me. Izuku's perspective, 3 hours following the admission exam. I had a big, proud smile on my face as I strolled along the sidewalk in Musutafu City, Japan. I had a lot more important place to go, so I wasn't going home just yet. That would be later. The convenience store. I jogged lightly across the quiet street after noticing the rather bright lights coming from the building indicated earlier, and I pushed open the door. With a thunderous ring from the bell attached to the door, the sunset sun flickered across the huge windows and moved in response to my push. I noticed Colin and CC in a matter of seconds, sprinting straight for me from the back, followed shortly after by Suzaku and Lelouch. CC as Colin put her arms around me in what may have been her tightest hug to yet, she began examining my face and immediate skin to check for any injuries. Lelouch simply inquired, "So, how was it?" as if my current situation were more amusing than worrisome. I started talking endlessly about the various quirks, which made Suzaku laugh. I think I got a pretty good score. I got to see so many awesome quirks, like a guy with a bird head, a girl with bright pink skin that could create acid, zero gravity at your fingertips, and having tons of arms, I said. CC sighed with relief when he saw that I was unharmed, and Colin at last relaxed as well. With yet another broad smile, Colin exulted triumphantly. "Well, how does it feel to get that out of the way? No more studying for a while, no more stress. All you need to do is wait to see that sweet, sweet acceptance notice." Careful not to jinx it, Colin. Nothing is set in stone. Let us not forget that quirkless behavior is still a factor in the rankings. Even if you were the best candidate in the building, bias and prejudice are still very possible as a chance to ruin his run. Lelouch was speaking, and Suzaku was grid ahead. His response must have been influenced by the discrimination he encountered during the 11s era. No matter the case, honey, Izuku has worked so hard to become a hero. What if he isn't accepted? What would we do? CC asked anxiously, with Suzaku's and Colin's brows knitted. Lelouch started to say something, but I spoke first. Zero may have been considered a hero by many, but in short, he never did it legally until he became the Knight of Nunnery v Britannia after the Zero Requiem. There are always options. As I was speaking, Lelouch gave me a small smile, as if he was impressed that I had backup plans in place. I would love to get in and all, but let's be real here. Zero was never a big superhero. He was a vigilante, a knight for justice, the Black Knight, the miracle worker, and a genius strategist. If we truly wish for the real Zero, then it is likely that a hero license would restrict me from being Zero in the same way as you guys. Lelouch's smile only became bigger when Suzaku sighed in exhaustion. Even if I do fail, I know for a fact that I still have people to save, and a statement to give to the world. As Izuku Midoriya, a hero, or the next big vigilante, Zero, I will do what I have to do either way. Suzaku pondered in a frustrated voice, "Man, you really are just like Lelouch." I laughed to myself at his reflections before strolling up to one of the seats in the store's corner from that fateful day when I got the best present anyone had ever given me. Colin sat down close to CC in the same chair. Assumed her pedestal, Lelouch sitting next to her, and her pet cheese-kun. Suzaku stood without moving, leaning against the wall and grinning proudly. They all turned to face me and nodded without hesitation as they said, "I just want to thank you all for your support. Because I'm gonna need your support even more in the future." Suzaku teased, "We only want you to succeed, so we will help you for as long as you need." Zero. Lelouch gave a little laugh, and the rapt CC grumbled. I slumped back in my seat with Colin nestled in the crook of my neck, and I had only one vague thought as Lelouch got up to go get drinks to celebrate finishing the admission exam. The findings are coming. Pav of the narrator. A boy stood in his bathroom, washing his hair in the sink, a black substance leaking from his soapy hands into the sink basin and spiraling down the drain in the confines of a rather dull apartment with only the most basic amenities. The black dye had now spilled into the sink's drain, exposing the boy's indigo hair, adorned with bright pink highlights, as he flipped his hair around and looked into the mirror. His violet eyes glared into the mirror with a hatred for the person he was staring at, but no discernible malice. He found an open envelope and a metallic disc with a message on it on the counter. He was accepted into the General Studies Elite main course at UA, namely into Class 1C. He put his hands on the counter as he looked at his reflection with obvious disgust, and then he closed his eyes in dissatisfaction with a loud moan. After taking a towel to dry his face and hair from the water, the kid remarked to himself in a weary tone, "Well, aside from heroics, their general education is also stunning." At least I have that to look forward to. Maybe. Before long, he turns back, throws his towel in a basket, and enters his bedroom. When he arrives, he picks up a black face mask made of jagged obsidian and laced with sapphire. It clicks into place on his face with a satisfying click. He dons basic black jeans and shoes, as well as a jet black sweatshirt with navy blue accents on the arms. He hurled a linked kunai out of his hand and attached it to a building nearby before jumping out of the building and landing on a windowsill while holding two strange lighters at his hips. He maintained a chilly demeanor as he swung, still lacking any excitement. Pav of the narrator. A rather tall girl was spread out on her bed, shrieking contentedly next to her stoic buddy, who was also grinning with satisfaction. Both of them had successfully enrolled in the hero course after opening their letters to Ua. As her buddy with short violet hair and earphone jacks sticking out of her ears laughed at her out-of-character behavior, the girl with long raven black hair was rolling around on her bed and squealing with ecstasy. I get that you're excited as all hell right now, Momo, but you need to chill the fuck out, alright? The girl, now known as Momo, shouts to the now known Kyoka, but how can I calm down when I'm finally going to be a hero student? I mean, it's been my dream for years. Kyoka, are you seriously telling me that you aren't excited? Her ebony eyes sparkle brightly. As she got up to go to the restroom of the pretty showy mansion, she retorted sarcastically, I mean, of course I'm excited, but I have restraint at least. As soon as she enters the bathroom, she looks at the mirror and loses herself in her thoughts. Reflections on the startling incidents that transpired during the entrance exam. She was thinking about a certain boy with jet black hair who occurred to catch her eye. She hoped he made it possible for them to speak once more. Pav of the narrator. A woman's dark red dress billowed in the lively night wind as she leapt from roof to roof. She noticed two girls, one with chestnut hair and the other with brilliant pink complexion, hugging and cheering triumphantly as she jumped from building to building. They were obviously happy with the previous events. Perhaps they had landed their ideal job. Eventually, the blonde woman skidded to a halt, her sharpened teeth clenching slightly as her slitted eyes squinted in the fierce winds. As she started to run again, she thought to herself, Tisk. How am I supposed to find him by simply searching aimlessly? I would have to get stupidly lucky to find him. Izuku's perspective. I remained silent as I sat in my room. My response was already gone, and my letter was on my lap, already opened. If I know Colin at all, she will be down here in half an hour. Lelouch had been informed. Most people would be crying, but me? To be honest, rejection is actually a blessing. Academically, Ua might not be my hero. I still want to live my dream, though. And if I really have to, I'll live it as Zero, Pav of the narrator. With a sharpened stone face and an absent-minded blank look, the youngster we have come to know as Izuku Yagi Midoriya, or just Izuku Midoriya, is seen strolling casually through the streets of his hometown, Musutafu, Japan. Like his jumbled mind, which was constantly coming up with whatever hypotheses and questions he felt were necessary in a matter of seconds, his enormous forest green hair was as untidy as ever. In an effort to establish enduring peace, his journey was designed to return him to the location of his special talent, the convenience store run by the guy who wreaked havoc on the world. The man formerly known as the Miracle Maker, Zero. The man who would assist Izuku with his new strategy. The man who was going to take on the mantle once more. Izuku reached his location, carefully pulled open the door so as not to break the glass, and entered the unassuming structure once more. The fact that Lelouch was awake and standing in front of him with a severe expression on his face instantly caught his attention. It would be an understatement to say that Lelouch was incensed after Izuku messaged him about his rejection from Ua. After his brief outburst following his exam, Izuku was well aware of what that severe expression held for him. He still had a dream, and even if Ua wasn't the place where he would pursue it, he would still need to follow the guidance of those who had educated him. Just, but illegal. Listen here, kid. You having come here again likely means that you are to embark on the journey that me and Suzaku once have. I'm here to warn you that this life is even more dangerous than that of a hero. Nearly nobody will help you financially, or medically, unless you force them to with your Gios. This is your last chance to back out, because once you become Zero, there will be absolutely no turning back. Izuku could only grin with excitement in reaction to Lelouch and his speech. He was just as confident and excited as he had been on the day of the admission exam, if not more so. I know who I am, I know who I want to be, and I know what I want to do. Turning tail, and fleeing from my dream when it is right within my reach would be an insult to my mother, to Colin, to Suzaku, to you, and to everybody who has ever believed in me. So sign me up already. Lelouch sighs and turns to the front counter, his heart as heavy as an anvil. Without even looking back to see if he was being followed, He gave the cold order, "Follow me." Izuku trailed closely behind, ultimately settling in beside Lelouch. Shortly after, they both went through a few more doors and onto a hallway more into the building. They stopped walking at the 7th door, and Lelouch took a ring of keys out of his pocket. Having chosen the right key, Lelouch unlocked the door and gripped the doorknob. He lets out another sigh, swings the door wide, and looks over his shoulder at his protege. Inside, Izuku's former mentors were standing and chatting amiably with the retired miracle worker's wife. Conversations abruptly stopped as they entered, and they silently gazed at the two geniuses. Colin and Suzaku gave each other discreet nods as CC approached Lelouch and gave him a firm embrace. Suzaku nodded sadly at Izuku, as though he were sorry for being rejected for the exam. Colin was furious at UA and their employees' actions, but all he could do was look at the floor. Everyone in the room was obviously affected by the stress, and the mood was much less relaxed than usual. A table with a case on top stood in the center of the space. CC and Lelouch came next. The bright ex-con beckons his apprentice near stated case after they have concluded their hug. Lelouch pushed a button on the case as they arrived at the table, and it opened to display a pretty recognizable ensemble. Suzaku was aware that it was the clothing that destroyed his greatest love and shaped his entire existence. It was Colin's first true crush. CC recognized it as her accomplice's alter ego. It was best known by Lelouch. Without taking his eyes off the strange disguise he planned to don, the child questioned, "Do I put it on?" "Yes. If you walk through the door at the end of the room, there will be a changing area. This attire is yours now. The attire, the name, the reputation, and the burden, they are all yours once you've put on the mask. Are you ready?" The boy with the Viridian emblem closed the case immediately, took it by the handle, and carried it to the door. He pushed the door open, and the massive metal gate rapidly enveloped him. After throwing away his shirt in the privacy of the unfamiliar changing room, he looks into the transparent mirror and realizes how much progress he has achieved because of his friends' and allies' unwavering support. Izuku opened the case again with a pleased but nervous sigh, glancing down at the violet bodysuit lined with a golden hue, the black sleek laced with scarlet, and the spotless white cravat that complemented the British design motif. However, the mask that hid the identities of the two zeros in front of me, the crown, and the mark of the miracle creator were all lying in front of me, the glass gleaming brightly in the intense ceiling light. He immediately zipped up the back of the bodysuit, slipped it on, grabbed the black cape, and took another look in the mirror. The scarlet stood out behind my head and back as I tossed it over my shoulders and crossed them together around my pecs. I finally grabbed the mask by reaching below. He left the case and his old clothes behind as he left the changing room, only to be discovered standing in front of the three individuals who had transformed him into the phenomena in front of them. Lelouch couldn't resist grinning proudly but fearfully at him, and Suzaku and Colin joined in a little cheer. CC grinned slightly but contentedly at Izuku as he silently gazed down at the mask in his fingers. He sighed deeply again after glancing one more time at the four individuals he regarded as family: anxiety, training, love, care, and procrastination for almost a year. Izuku donned the disguise. Point of view of the narrator. 8 hours later, alongside heroes like Mirko, Rocklock, and her close friends in the Wild Pussycats, a woman with short red hair styled into 3 bangs and red face paint that looked like whiskers was racing across the rooftops. According to rumors, Rocklock had been on a nighttime trip, scouting the shadowed alleyways in the vicinity of the ever-watchful Mirko. When Mirko heard a lot of guttural screams coming from an abandoned hotel building during their ongoing hunt for anyone disturbing the calm, she paused and, being Mirko, investigated the situation alone. Unusually for her, she asked for help right away when she saw a man wearing a black sweatshirt with electric blue accents on the sleeves brandishing the renowned violet sword. When the Pussycats finally showed up, Indigo had already started to leave. This culminated in the present, where a boy dressed in charcoal black merely leaps from building to get away from the number 5 hero, a full squad of professionals, and a recon expert. While the Pussycats were unable to attain the same mobility, Indigo swung through the streets with ease and had little to no difficulty hurling his chain from building to building. While Rocklock and Mirko followed him, Mandalay, Tiger, and Pixie Bob barely managed to keep up with Ragdoll, who persisted in pursuing him. "Listen here, buddy. This is getting annoying, so I'm done fucking around. Why here?" was the final expression of Mirko's typical demeanor. She sprung to her feet and flew toward the airborne Vigilante at nearly Mach speeds, her strong legs not straining from the startling spectacle. With blank eyes, Indigo responds by yanking himself out of the way and securing a chain to another building. The black and purple emblazoned swordsman and Mirko land a few blocks apart, both of them silently glaring at one another. Rocklock was further away since Mirko had hurried ahead more quickly than he could follow, and the ragdoll's ability to keep track from a great distance was the only reason the pussycats were still present. Mirko said arrogantly, "You coward, everyone talks you up so damn much, but so far, you've just been running away. Where's the fire, you bastard?" As she started to run at the flame-wielding, who was now inert. The vigilante remained motionless, his look not malicious but annoyed. She raised her legs and tried a Luna ring when Mirko finally approached. Indigo sighed in frustration, sidestepped her strike, and even as she whirled in midair, landed a backhand that was precisely positioned on her jaw, the violet flames intertwined with his clenched fist adding force and harm. When Rocklock finally caught up, that single blow sent Mirko hurtling toward a far-off structure. Mirko gave herself a face slap and was about to leap back when she looked up to see Rocklock flying through the air just like Mirko had, barely catching himself with one of his discs. It was obvious that he was making no attempt at all and was only making a point. Indigo remained seated on the roof, merely glaring at them in silence and boredom. With a frantic grin, she yelled, "Ooh, you cocky bastard. I can't wait for that one moment when I can crush that ego of yours," and ran toward him once more, getting ready to use a combination of her Luna Rush and a round of bicycle kicks. In a defensive position, the vigilante raised his arms to absorb the majority of her vicious kicks. He finally grabbed her by the ankles and slammed her against the ceiling, pushing her aside as she backed away from the concrete. But after being booted off her feet, she sprung back up and charged at him, surprising him with two powerful kicks, one of which actually struck the side of his head, causing him to grunt in frustration. Rocklock said, "I'm not letting you have all the fun. Just because I ain't top 10, it doesn't mean I can't fight," as he swung one of his discs in the direction of the dazed adversary, striking his forehead near his eye. Indigo laid comatose on the pavement after Tiger, who had finally arrived at the battle, seized him from behind and suplexed him on it. Several sand warriors then started to gather around the group of heroes to stand guard. As Tiger, Pixie Bob, and Ragdoll started their Team Rocket launch entry, Mandalay apologized in her customary composed way for the late arrival. Rocklock looked back at the apparently unaware vigilante and said, squinting his eyes, "No worries, we got the bastard because you guys showed." A few moments later, the skilled Mirko lets out an irritated sigh. She then turns back to face the unassuming adversary and observes the violet glow of his lightsaber combat weapon sparking in his hands. With little to no expression in his low voice and a gleam of excitement in his eyes, he pondered, "Well, I guess I have time to kill. I hope all that trash talk you spit doesn't translate to a lack of skill." In a matter of seconds, he was standing and running for the group of heroes across from Tiger, his primary goal being Mirko. Mandalay leapt forward with a spinning kick, but she was cut up her body after being caught by the calf. She was eliminated from the battle because, although it didn't cut deeply, the burn caused it to linger and pain too much. Tiger went up from his station and tried to grab the young opponent again, but Pixie Bob's sand warriors were having trouble moving in the small area of the rooftop, leaving Pixie vulnerable to a simple neck chop. Surprisingly, he was successful since Rocklock threw another disc at him, but it was destroyed in midair. Tiger's skin and suit were burning from the intense heat that Indigo had generated, and he was radiating an aura that burned wood within 10 meters of himself. He shrugs Tiger off and spins around, stabbing him through the thigh and slapping him across the nose with the handle of his weapon. Rocklock was still in startled silence when Mirko charged forward, attempting to land a Luna Rush while battering him with viscous kicks that he had to block with his purple sword. The heat was overloading her senses and charring little pieces of her hero's suit. When she touched pure condensed and sharpened heat, she was abruptly perplexed as to why she wasn't losing her legs, but she wasn't complaining at all. Rocklock surged forward with another disc, intending to use it up close, but it burned in his hand, and he was only able to deliver simple punches in the frenzied flurry of kicks before being booted out. "Goddammit, I'm not going down that easily," he said as he hurried back to his feet, only to be pinned against a rooftop railing by a flying ragdoll. The heat was getting to Mirko, who had retreated and was wiping the perspiration from her brow. "So, where'd all that trash talk go, huh? I thought that you would crush my ego. I asked for something entertaining, and you gave me this. What a waste." Mirko said, "TCH, don't get cocky. The fight isn't over yet." Her eyes were sparkling with excitement, and despite her dreadful circumstances, there was no sign of fear. They wait for one of them to initiate contact as both of them adopt defensive positions. Finally, out of excitement, Mirko charged forward to start another series of bicycle kicks, only to be sidestepped, booted across the side of the head, and stabbed through the leg. Indigo scowled at the lone conscious hero left, while Mirko lay on the concrete with her fellow heroes, battered and defeated. He turned around as he extinguished his violet blade and remarked nonchalantly, "I guess your drive is impressive, but you aren't that entertaining. It's not that I disrespect you. I simply don't exactly respect you." Indigo was able to escape unscathed, leaving Mirko to gaze down in defeat and consider how she may have handled the encounter differently. With his ragged mask gleaming in the moonlight, Indigo's hidden face remained expressionless. After a few minutes of swinging the chain from his palm, he heard the usual scream coming from an alley. But things would be different this time. Indigo perspective. As I ascended my way toward the place where I heard the scream, I heard my spearhead repeatedly crunching against the building's edge. I heard several of them, and it was a male scream. Numerous gunshots. What in the world am I missing? How come I wasn't invited? Jokes aside, I finally located the location of the screaming, which I was positive originated from a sizable apartment complex that had been extensively demolished. I say came because there was no longer any gunfire or screaming. I jumped toward the empty building and swung into an open window with a hum of bewilderment. As I mentioned, the building was hollow. The inside of the ruined building was surrounded by pitch-black mass, with just a few moonlight glimpses visible through the broken windows that littered the walls. I trod on something moist and squishy as I investigated the building, and it had a warmth that only I could really understand. Fresh meat that has been sliced. It was neatly sliced, but not burned. I pondered who had done this type of thing so quickly, and I felt amazed, concerned, and perplexed. Seeing the carnage that actually surrounding me, I lit up my favorite ignition stick once more and started to illuminate the scene. They were all armed, and based on what I could see, they were not using their weapons effectively. However, I noticed something gleaming a little higher in the horizon. The entire building was illuminated by a bright light that briefly behaved like a damn flashbang before I could locate it myself. My eyes widened in disbelief as I eventually reoriented myself to the new view in front of me. And enthusiasm. Not a peat, but genuine, unadulterated excitement for the first time in 6 years. A heap of undoubtedly more than 100 gas-covered, cold, and lifeless bodies, with a flamboyant man standing on top of them all. He was wearing a purple bodysuit with gold accents and a black and scarlet cape over his shoulders. But the mask was the final nail in the coffin. His gaze told me that he wasn't the original, but my quirk allowed me to see through his mask. His look was just as fierce, passionate, self-assured, and identical to the late miracle workers. The same look in his eyes that had the same signature. I was aware that he was rather unique, but what he said were the cherry on top. His name is I am Zero. Indigo perspective. This is entertaining, in my opinion. A Zero wannabe brandishing the same blade he used to stab Lelouch v Britannia, the Britannian dictator, in the heart. Most people are unaware that the guy who killed Zero was the same man who had defeated Cornelia Lee Britannia and founded the Black Knights all those years ago. I could see a person's entire form and sense body heat, so I knew it wasn't the original or a poor imitation from the Britannian era. This man was brand new. As he gazed down at me from his mound of death, Zero said more than he asked, "So, you came?" I sarcastically replied, trying to maintain a straight expression under my charcoal mask, "Yeah, pretty hard not to when I'm not invited to a slaughter as entertaining as this must have been." With the same harsh tone that the original Zero used when leading the Black Knights, he probed, "Entertaining? Are you sure that you kill for fun? If that were the case, then why did you let that group of heroes live? They didn't deserve to die, they were doing what they think is the right thing." He continued, his look that he believed was hidden unchanged, saying, "So you do have morals? The media, as well as yourself, tries to paint you as the villain, but for every sin you have committed, you have done another 10 virtuous acts. You like to have a good fight, that's for sure. But you are no villain. For 6 years straight, you have fought for what you thought was just, as a hero would, but better." My brows furrowed in surprise at his ease in figuring out my motivations, and my sarcasm had long since fled my face. For someone your age, with so much time to lose, and so much life you have ahead, you clearly fight for a reason. You gain traction for ending the most amount of miserable lives that belong to rapists, or sexual criminals, in just the span of a month, and you have only expanded upon that record as the months fly by. I inquire slowly, "What of it?" and quickly get a far faster response. I believe that we both have common grounds, goals, and interests. As I am sure you are aware, I am not the original, nor will I likely be able to live up to his reputation, but I am positive that I am no drawback. I am certain that if we were to combine our individual skill sets together, then we could both achieve what we wish. He continued even though I had already started to consider his notion. His reflection was intriguing, but I had to point out a few flaws. Even though you relish the taste of victory as much as I do, we both know that we don't want to live to kill forever. We can still fix this world. If you were to join me, then I assure you, we can cleanse this society. This isn't the Britannian era, is it? Quirked individuals roam the streets everywhere. This world is impossible to fix. My goal isn't to fix the world. It's to make it so that men, women and children don't have to worry about going out for a walk on their own, or about being beautiful people. I want people to feel safe, and I want to assert justice upon those who have incurred it. Your mission is a valiant one, and I respect your dream, but it is simply not possible, even for me. After listening to what I had to say for a few seconds, he started talking again. You may be correct in that aspect. But is it not worth an attempt? You wish to spread justice across the planet, and bring about peace and safety. I seek justice and world peace, like my predecessor before me did. We both want practically the same thing. You started to fight for Japan, for the unfortunate people because you see the world as rotten as I see it. There may be few, but people across the globe have recognized your deeds, and are cheering for you to succeed, and bring justice to those who deserve it. You instilled hope across the world, even if it is minuscule, it is still more than absolutely nothing. At last, I responded once more. So what? You're saying it's my responsibility or something? I'm doing the best I can. What do you want? I received a rude awakening. You must take responsibility for the hope you have created. I may be the miracle worker, but I can't work a miracle without the aid of talented people like you. We can bring down the societal biases, all of the lies, and all of the injustices for quirked, quirkless, the races, the masses, all of them. All I need is one bright light, and justice can thrive. My heart soared at the pure intensity behind that mask. The mask of the miracle maker, the mask that hid his own voice. Creating widespread peace and prosperity was nearly difficult, but because I have the ability to do it, why the devil shouldn't I try? Forget about the hero society. Damn the villain society. There's a reason I went with the intermediate route. That I might become stronger for the few people in my life who mean anything to me and swing the blade of justice. I know the odds, Indigo. You needn't tell me that luck is a major factor, because it definitely is. Yet we were given a dream, a goal, and the power to achieve it, so why should we ever do anything else but chase that dream? This world needs us. This world needs you. I need you. I can't change the world off ideology alone. So, join me. I experienced an odd feeling that shot through my body for the first time in what seemed like 10 years. My pupils had shrunk to the size of periods on paper, and my heart was racing. It rumbled through my head, torso, and limbs. Around me, sparks of intense blue and purple flame appeared, and my mask shook a little as my entire body started to tremble. I was really looking forward to something. I finally give in as I see the boy wearing the mask exhale in relief. You sure do have a way with words, you son of a bitch. Damn it, I'm in. His feelings would be well concealed by that facade, if it was opaque to my vision. So, the gas on that pile. Forgive me for assuming, but is this supposed to be an offering for me? I asked jokingly, glancing at the quantity of motor oil that was glazed across every corpse inside the building, as the crimson-cloaked genius leapt from the pile and landed in front of me, sheathing the Emperor's blade at his hip. I saw him wince behind his mask and anxiously tried to think of a non-offensive answer, which made me snicker a little. I saw it fitting of our alliance, a bright violet light illuminating one singular building. It showcases our collective goal, and the color we have both become accustomed to. I turn around and head back toward the window from which I had come, saying, okay then. I don't hate the sound of that. I jumped up to my position and flinched as Zero yelled out to me, before we leave, should we not reveal our faces to one another? Quite unlike Zero to so openly reveal one's face to an ally he has known for less than 10 minutes. Is it out of curiosity, blind ignorance, or both? With my jagged mechanical mask covering my genuine voice and making it even more raspy than usual, I laughed grimly to myself. I have theorized your identity for 3 years. To say I am curious would be a blind understatement. Well, I guess that since I can already see your face, I might as well make it even. Zero tried to respond. Wait, what do you mean you can see my FA? Before I interrupted once more. As I remove the face mask that has hidden the great majority of who I am for the past 6 years, I add, my quirk is quite the fun one. Let's just leave it there for now. For the next 10 seconds, he just stared at my face in silence, his expression unreadable. With a hoarse laugh, I inquire, were you close with your theories? As I take out a pack of cigarettes from my sweater pocket. He pondered mechanically, unsure of my identity. You are a lot younger than I had anticipated. I recall seeing you at the entrance exam for UA's General Studies, only with black hair. I pounced at the chance since I heard they had excellent education, and I saw you there too. You almost caught up to me, and you don't look too old. He sighed as he removed his mask, revealing the face I had only been able to see through Heatseeker. Freckles, emerald eyes, youth, and a mop of viridian hair on his head. When we meet regularly, you may refer to me as Izuku. I am 2015, turning 16 in July. You're not at all like the original, Tisk. I turn around completely and sit on the windowsill, thinking sarcastically, okay, you may call me Percy. But you still haven't responded to my question. Were you accurate in your guess? I ask cheekily if he is close to me. I've been thinking for a long time that you might be Endeavor's hidden love child, and I still kind of think that. You outshine him, but no one else possesses a fire quirk as powerful as his. I chuckle loudly and smirk at the comment. Well, you're right about the entire Endeavor thing, and I appreciate the compliment. You must have some form of intelligence-based quirk, don't you think? I inquire with an unwavering sneer, and he responds, you are wrong on that one. I click my mask back on as he puts it on again. He jumped up to a window ledge next to mine and spoke softly, I am quirkless. Well, that just makes you even more impressive. With excitement, I respond as I create a tiny violet spark in my hand and fling it at the heap of oiled bodies, igniting the mountain of the dead and blocking my nose from the stench of burning flesh. Your knowledge and what you accomplished with those bodies are even more amazing because you don't have any peculiarities. Zero will undoubtedly always have something to offer. You are meant to be the miracle worker, after all. At that moment, his face twisted into a broad, sincere smile, an expression I don't frequently see. Thank you for your kind remarks. Normally I would be putting out a fire like this, but since no innocent lives were in danger and it was to signify an alliance, I was completely enthralled. I am not used to such compliments. He says in his usual orderly tone, looking toward the radiant violet flames rather than toward me. No thanks necessary. I simply put it, as I draw my eyes toward the bright fire. I'm just assuming that standards will be followed, then. Kill those who deserve it, save those who deserve it, and bring justice to the world. I plead anxiously, hoping that perhaps this new Zero won't make the same mistakes as the original. Is that enough? I suppose he has already considered it. From a distance, we watched the flames spread up the building, thankfully not near any other inhabited buildings, and I swiftly swung my way up to another building after we both leapt out of the burning building through our respective windows. He handed me his phone, which I gave him, and we exchanged numbers without saying a word. I assume you didn't get into UA? No, I was turned down because I didn't have a quirk, I said, already knowing the response. After getting his phone, he stood up and said, well, then I guess I'm the informant. I smiled cheekily before getting up and rushing up to the edge of the roof. I guess it's hurtful, but I saw it coming a mile away, he said with a hint of anger. Well, if I don't take a leave of absence soon, that fire is going to get me a lot of shit, so I'd better get out. I say this fast, jumping off my perch and throwing my chain kunai to the closest building so I can get momentum to swing. I glance back a second and see the new Zero starting to mosey away without giving me a sidelong glance. It appears that this new year will be more intriguing than I had anticipated. Izuku's perspective. I opened the door to my house a little harder than usual because I must have been exhausted from fighting that group of criminals, talking with the most well-known and influential vigilante to date, returning the suit for tomorrow, and having to drag my sorry ass home. Mom immediately got up from the couch as soon as I walked in the door and gave me her warm smile, saying, welcome home, Izuku. How was your evening? I couldn't resist the need to sit down and speak with the woman who produced me, yet I couldn't help but feel that same warmth enveloping me. I suppose it's tiresome. However, I enjoyed myself. Mom, how was your evening? I respond with all the energy I have left, stumbling to her after throwing away my shoes. Seeing how exhausted I was, she assisted me in sitting on the couch and hugged me for a little while. I guess you weren't kidding about the tiring bit, huh? Her emerald eyes gleamed with laughter as she laughed in a pretty animated manner. Mom, may I please take a bath? There should be clothes and a towel ready for you already, she said, nodding and helping me up while patting my head. I really need some sleep, she said with the same tender face. I hope you had a pleasant night. I turned around and strolled toward the restroom after softly nodding with an appreciative smile. I was perplexed by the sound of the running water, but I went inside anyway, and as I slid the door open, I could hear the desperate cries from the living room, but it was too late. Izuku. Wait, avoid opening the door. Mom shouted anxiously, as I now was establishing eye contact with Mitsuki Bakugo, who just so happened to be standing in the curtainless shower, with a hand between her thighs in a not-so-clean manner. My eyes had obviously popped up. Mitsuki's perspective. 10 minutes prior, when a corny dramedy was shown on Inko's living room television, Inko was completely captivated by the, in my opinion, dreadful jokes and incredibly simple, dramatic events that transpired. It seems that the two main characters liked each other as children and continued to do so as adults, but out of spite, they started insulting and acting as though they detested each other. They sound like damn bots with some of their responses, and I just find it boring. As an example, a side character got broken up with via text on her birthday, and instead of getting upset or cutting off contact for a while, she hits the guy with the, "I'm not mad, just disappointed" line. After that, I couldn't stand to watch any more of that nonsense. I'm not a movie critic or analyst, but this is just ridiculous. I stood in her kitchen in complete silence, genuinely impressed by how much Inko loves this show, but what have I learned in my 30 years of life? Everyone has an opinion, and even though I completely disagree, she is too kind for me to openly bully her because of it. However, I was starting to feel the effects of the series. "Hey Inko, is it okay if I use your shower? I just need to wipe away some of the rust, if you get what I mean." Inko turned to face me, her eyes innocent and her face silly as she gave me the thumbs up. I arose from my shambles of embarrassment and proceeded to her bathroom to tidy up. Warning. NSFW. As I slid the door open, the smell of various products and powders filled my nostrils, confusing and comforting me at the same time. The walls were plated in black and white, the floor was smooth and white, the washing machine was running, the dryer was not in use, the laundry baskets were empty, and the shower was empty. For the time being, anyway. After feeling the chilly bathroom air on my bare skin, I quickly threw off my clothes and closed the door behind me. I exhaled a fantastic sigh as I reached into the shower to turn on the water before getting in. I decided it was time to get in because, although my body was warm on the inside, it was cold to the touch, and even if I let my fingers wander over the soft surface of my inner thigh, torso, or perhaps one of my voluptuous breasts, it would still give me a strong shiver of perplexing pleasure to ring through my body. Another ecstatic sigh of relief escaped my enraptured lips as I used my hands to rub the warm water across my arms and hips, bringing my head of spiky blonde hair under the showerhead and letting the hot water rain down over me. Anticipation was at its height as my toes made first contact with the now wet shower floor, so I entered and let the water rush down my curvy figure. My arms were dangling at my sides, eager to grope up my soft figure or do something in this moment of isolation, and they soon got to work after I grabbed the bar of soap that belonged to Inko and started to take long yet gentle strokes across my tender skin, not evoking as much of a reaction as before. I soon leaned against the shower wall, allowing the water to reach my legs a bit easier, so I could simply lay back in ecstasy as best I could. I scrubbed all over my special parts, including my arms, legs, and torso, but I didn't get nearly as good of a response as just rubbing myself. I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet, so I grabbed some of the shampoo that appeared to be Inko's, squirted a sustainable amount into my hair, closed my eyes, and started to scrub. Once more, I would jerk around to get better angles, and my breasts would jiggle a little with the motion, but it was still nothing like a massage or caress for the sake of it. I quickly washed all the soap suds out of my hair and sighed again, this time in confusion and mild annoyance. I was thinking about what I should do next when a random thought suddenly came to me. It was about the time I saw Izuku's transformation, the time I believe I had my last severe depressive episode, when his new body pushed against his casual attire, his typical bright smile, and a bag strewn over his shoulder as if he were as proud as he could be while still being adorably humble. My fingers finally touched my nether regions, giving me another opportunity to pull away, but I just couldn't. The memories of his much more detailed arms, his smile, his bod, his demeanor, and his abrupt presence culminated in where my hand was shortly crossing toward. My fingers started rubbing across the opening of my awaiting core, and almost instantly I let out an uncontrollably loud moan of utter euphoria, wondering what the hell was in Izuku's pants. I started rubbing around the soft area that I had recently trimmed for smoother access, teasing my own anxious pussy with what I was imagining. But I wasn't doing a perfect job, letting a few squeaks and squeals escape my enamored lips, my passion simmering across my entire body, every curve, every inch, trembling in stupid ecstasy. I was too far gone, and two of my fingers pierced the pulsing lips of my core, moving around wildly as I bit my lip to bite back any more moans. I was now against the wall, the warm water still coating my trembling body as I kept moving my fingers and eventually incorporated my hips into the rhythm. My demise was drawing near quickly, and my groans were becoming less and less controlled, my breath coming in sharp gasps, and my hand on my breast, squeezing it to simulate what I so desperately hope will just happen to me. My husband's limp dick and flimsy arms couldn't fuck me, spank me, or pleasure me. In fact, they couldn't even produce a son who was respectful to anyone, much less his own mother. All of these months of being alone, combined with that gorgeous hunk of a man named Izuku who had entered my life just months earlier, made this probably better than any sexual act one have ever engaged in. However, if he treated me well, showed me some kindness, and had the ability to dick me down any day of the week, I wouldn't care if he used me like a damn sex toy. Thinking such ideas only increased my need and made my fingers move more quickly. Every second that went by just made my groans more frequent, with my climax just a few seconds away. As my groans reached their peak, I heard the bathroom door slide open, displaying the same boy that I had been picturing. The very boy I was having fun with at the moment. As I continued, stunned and unsure of what to say, he stared at me in silence for about 3 seconds. However, as I stared at him, my orgasm only accelerated because the boy had caught me in a naughty act that made my cheeks flush every time I thought of him. As he watched me, I let out my moans, unable to hold back my pleasure for another second, and only started to rub even more intensely, until a few seconds later, I squirted out the fluids formed by my sheer passion, moaning uncontrollably with the most stupid expression possible. I should have felt ashamed and scared, but when I fell to my knees, my body shaking from the pleasure this child had given me, all I could do was smile in absolute joy. He didn't conceal his eyes or turn away during the whole event. I'm very happy with that. Izuku's perspective. I was sprawled out on a gym mat, having been washed like a dirty dish by my new associate, Percival, whose mask was in the bag of his backpack and mine was back at my house. We had been sparring quirklessly to test our base abilities, especially if we were to face someone like Eraserhead or someone with a heatproof quirk. For the first time in nearly a month, a rather familiar feeling overcame my senses. He shook his head whenever he defeated me, which only added to the confusion as I was thrown like dough, but I had expected him to have relied solely on his quirk and that blade that earned him his reputation, so of course this was the one time I was wrong. His appropriately indigo eyes hardly looked upon me with distaste. I slowly raised my head to gaze at him, but all I saw in return was a puzzled expression. I know you aren't bad. However, that was just embarrassing. With the same puzzled expression on his honed face, Percy criticized, there were so many moments where you could have gotten the upper hand, or landed a couple more hits, but it's like you were blatantly ignoring them. Sorry, I guess I'm just not at the top of my game today. I thought to myself with a hint of shame, wondering how I could be performing so poorly after all the training I've had. Percy soon came over and stood beside my dejected figure, saying, Look, I know we are far from the point of emotional talks, and I am no person to be asking about anything emotion-related. But are you thinking about something? I was momentarily taken aback by his abrupt query as I considered my response and quickly came to the following conclusion. Something has come up recently. Trust me, Izuku, I have seen and heard the most fucked up things you could possibly imagine, so try me, he said before I could think of anything more to say. It's quite the strange event, so I find it unnecessary to start to ramble. I exhaled deeply, closed my eyes, and quickly got my bruised body off the mat. All right. Simply put, I went home after we got in touch, wanted to take a shower, and walked in on someone I've loved and respected for nearly my entire life. His lips merely made a straight line over his face as he peered right into my eyes in utter bewilderment while masturbating and groaning my name. With his pupils dwindling rapidly, he replied monotonously, Interesting. It's even worse, considering the fact I have a girlfriend. You had my curiosity, but now you have my attention, he said, staring at me in complete confusion, his expression turning from blank to slightly irritated inquiry. And I didn't even tell the whole story. I took a troubled breath, waltzed toward a bench like I had done multiple times in my prior training, sat down, and started thinking about what had happened a few days ago. Izuku's perspective, the following morning. Maybe it was just a stress reaction to the whole situation, but it didn't matter for long because I saw my mom standing in the kitchen and instantly remembered everything. The first thing I thought about was stretching my limbs above my head and going to the kitchen for breakfast, not the business with Indigo or the events with my mom and aunt. Finally dressed, Mitsuki sat quietly on the couch in the living room, a worried expression plastered on her face. Hey honey, how'd you sleep? I slept fine, I guess. Mom asked me softly and with a tight smile, as if afraid of my response. I answered in a non-talkative way, unable to look her or Mitsuki in the eye without flushing. Listen up. Regarding yesterday night, Mitsuki began to say, but I interrupted her, saying, it's okay. Let's put it out of our minds. I spoke louder than I had intended to, and before I could mumble as usual, I hurried back to my room to change because I was no longer hungry for breakfast. Soon after, I was back in the living room, wearing a gray t-shirt and black shorts, and I hurried to the front porch to get my old red sneakers. I'm off to the gym for a couple of hours. Without turning around, I called as I left through the front door. It appears that difficulties at home are not yet over. Izuku's perspective. The present my cheeks were crimson again when I had finished telling Percy the story, but when I turned to see where he had been standing, he was gone, and when I turned to look for the usually colorful but colorless Vigilante, I found him texting frantically on a phone, my phone. Well, Percy? What are you? Before I could get a response, or even finish my sentence, I heard the noise of a message being sent. Come to think of it, I heard it 2 more times during my retelling. Percival simply stared at me with a blank expression, but with a mischievous glint in his eyes. I'm fixing your issues for you, you're welcome. When I walked over and took my phone from him to examine what he had typed, my pupils briefly widened when I saw that he had sent a message to Colin in addition to my mother and Mitsuki. How did you know who to message? Colin was the only other female contact on your phone besides Mitsuki. And Mom? I inquired urgently after realizing that every message had been read. Guessing wasn't completely impossible. I could feel my mind going into a panic as the messages were straightforward invitations for the women described above to visit the public gym we were using. Percival. He interrupted me as I was rambling, saying, the best approach to deal with an issue is to tackle it head on. Why the heck would you? When the consequences become apparent, allowing a concern or issue to fester can only cause more pain. Besides, they all love you to death, so I'm sure that everything should be fine. I heard my mother and Mitsuki arguing as soon as he said that, and I tried to flee right away, but I was pulled back by the wrist. When I turned to use my Gios on the bastard, I saw that he had his eyes closed and a cheeky little grin covering his repulsive face. Where in hell do you think you're going, Midoriya? Come on now. They came specifically for you. Inko turned aside shyly, Mitsuki looked at the floor in what I imagined was small shame, and Colin seemed perfectly happy to just look at me. He mused mockingly before pushing me in the direction of the 3 most important ladies in my life. My mom, my aunt, and my fiancé. I took a big breath to confront the gym's elephant, but I was beaten to the punch. Hey, who are these 2? Percival had gone to another side of the gym to do a set of the leg press with as much weight as he could find. With a bob of her head, Colin queried incoherently, making me wince. Well, that's my mom, and that's my aunt Mitsuki. I started to say, trying to think of the right words, but Colin kept interrupting me as usual. Well, why are they here? As previously, she inquired. Well. There's something we need to talk about, Mom exclaimed halfway through my sentence, causing Mitsuki to slap herself across the face. I'm a terrible mother who has a son complex. I had expected Colin to simply turn around and walk away out of sheer detestation, but after a while I started to hear gut-busting laughter coming from her direction, and I looked down to the floor, not expecting her to just say it outright. My cheeks emblazoned in a scarlet hue, and Mitsuki simply looked annoyed with herself. All right, let me guess. You 3 like each other, even though you know it's strange, but you're limiting yourself out of a sense of decency. Colin. What a cliché, she thought, teasingly and oddly correctly. Instead of asking, I say, you've been watching harems, haven't you? Fuck you. They're hot when it gets good, and funny when it's bad. As Colin started to fumble back to her original point, I pinched the bridge of my nose in both annoyance and laughter. Look, why you know what I'm getting at. Your mom, your aunt, and me are all people you enjoy. It just so happens that a highly cheesy romance category is the solution you're looking for to be satisfied with all of us. With a flush that matched her hair, she babbled. Mom appeared completely bewildered, but I was now deeply intrigued and perplexed. Conversely, Mitsuki appeared enthusiastic and swiftly clasped Colin's arms. She said excitedly, I can agree to that arrangement. While my mother and I stared at her blankly. Mom and I exchanged silent glances, unsure of what to say. When Collins said, look, you both know that you want to, so why worry about awkwardness, or anything for that matter? Everything about us is weird, so why feel so uncomfortable? Mom and I exchanged a quick glance before nodding and grinning nervously. While still immaturely cuddling up to Colin, Mitsuki added, see? Now we have a lot more options for romance. Hell, we could expand, and make lonely nights even less lonely. After a while, Mitsuki seemed to realize something and approached me with a sultry grin, which instantly sent shivers down my spine. They started dragging me into the male restroom as she got closer to me and Colin started to follow closely behind. Mom. I suppose I should now call her Inko. Inko, who was obviously just as anxious as I was, started to cautiously follow me. Even sharing a kiss with these 3 might be nerve-wracking, even though I knew that 6 was out of the question. Percival's point of view. I was just ending my 500-pound leg press set when Izuku dealt with his nonsense. I was a little disappointed by the lack of challenge or interest presented by the really small amount of weight or force. As I was getting off the press, I heard shouting coming from the gym's weight room, which infuriated me because it was strictly forbidden to yell or scream. Seeking the source of the annoying chanting, I jogged over to the dumbbell rack. Eventually, I discovered a middle-aged man yelling at a somewhat tall boy with ash blonde hair to stop or go as he struggled to raise a 50-pound dumbbell. As I approached, I could hear the blonde using quite obscene language, and next to him was another boy with a somewhat more golden blonde head of hair. The ash blonde yelled like a 10-year-old on a COD lobby, "Listen kid, there is a strict policy against your behavior. Look at the damn sign, there's no yellin'. Oh shut the hell up. You know damn well that if you tell me to leave, I'll send you to hell and back. You're nothing to me, in fact, you should just go die right now." His tacky-haired friend laughed and acted as though they were superior to the poor man. The boy with the golden blonde hair interspersed with tacky lightning bolts said, "Just leave us be, you old battle axe. Bakugo is beyond you in every way, so just leave with your dignity intact. No, you two need to leave, now. This isn't the place for games and immature children like you pricks." When the ash blonde, now known as Bakugo, saw the man defending himself in his gym, he raised his palm and threw an explosion at their face, knocking them back and telling me to rush to his defense. "Stay down for your own good, you can't beat a hero course student with that little talent or worth. Just go jump off the nearest building you can find, and maybe you can come back with something that makes you worth a bit more." As I stood beside him, I heard the man click his tongue in shame. I sighed in frustration, gave the man a shoulder pat, and started to scowl at the two alleged UA students while muttering a little compliment. "All right then, heroes, I'm going to ask you to leave, once only. Or I'm going to make you." These two were easy pickings, but I knew I couldn't do the same things now as I could when I had the mask on and my hair dye was washed out. The tacky-looking youngster started to say, "Who the hell do you think you are, you prick? You think you can Jew?" I cut his neck with a little more force from my unusually blue fire. I got down on one knee and chopped him in the neck pressure point, exactly like I did his companion, while the explosive blonde raised his hands to blast me. I merely booted him in the ribs, knocking him down. I nodded to the man as I carried them to the door, both unconscious, and scooped them up on my shoulder, both taking up the same space. I heard contented groans from what I could only presume to be Izuku and his new accomplishment, as I passed the male restroom in the hallways. He went from being afraid of women to having a harem that was. I groaned in frustration and amusement at how fast things had happened, somewhat more intimate than simply being girlfriends. After throwing the two lads out of the gym, I quickly turned around and went to the men's locker room so I could go home. I suppose I should go on a patrol tonight since I'm bored with the weights and even the battles. Yes. That sounds more amusing.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.